licensing committee. And thank you all for attending. Certainly staff is always helpful and the board members. And just to take a minute and let everybody get settled, could the board members please introduce themselves, starting with Vice Chair Booth.
Hello, I'm Randy Booth, and I am representing District 13, which is Nebo School District and Provo City School District.
And Cindy, you're my next across, but you're muted.
Good morning, Cindy Davis, representing District 9, future District 11. Nice to be here.
Thank you. And Matt, I see you.
Yes, Matt Hymas, I represent District 3.
And Natalie.
Hi, I'm Member Klein. I represent District 11, soon to be District 9. Cindy and I are swapping numbers, but grateful to be here.
Thank you. And I didn't say this, but I have the opportunity to be the chair of this committee. My name's Carol Lear, and I am in District 7, soon to be District 6. So this is a little bit confusing for all of us, and we welcome all of you here again. So with that, we're doing making a couple of adjustments to the agenda because of staff people that would be helpful to have with us. So we're starting with the item, the DCFS data sharing agreement item, instead of the legal requirements, which we will get to shortly. So with that, Angie, I'm assuming the time is yours.
Yes, thank you. And I just wanted to also you, Chair Lear, that we may go back into public comment if the two members who signed up, I don't are waiting online yet.
And
So,
Angie, you're breaking up. I'm not sure if it was just me or if
No, it's breaking up. It was hard to hear.
okay. She did say that the members of the public who had signed up for public comment were not here yet, and we will have them later. But
I think she was
again.
still trying to talk and we still can't hear her after going off camera.
Oh,
you hear
I
me?
can't hear you, Angie.
Can you turn the time over to Tanya then to introduce?
yes, absolutely. Tanya Albernos, a specialist in this area. Go ahead.
Chair, Tanya Albernos, Coordinator for Prevention and Student Services. You didn't get enough of me yesterday, so I'm back again. Okay, so as you recall, last month we came to Law and Licensing to ask for the ability for DCFS to access the information data gateway in order to be able to look up the schools that children are attending when they get an allegation of abuse or neglect and need to go out and do an investigation. We had some conversation about it. There were some questions that DCFS could only answer, and they weren't able to be in attendance last month. So they are here today. Daniel Rich and Crystal Vale are here representing DCFS. We did not get any additional questions from board members to the questions that were asked last month. So we sent them your questions, and they're here to answer anything that they can for you today. Angie, I don't know if you want me to add anything else.
And I think Angie's having a hard time with her audio, so that sounds great. So who do you want to start with, Tanya?
Dan, if you want to go ahead and speak to some of the questions that were asked last time, and you just want to provide some of those answers, that would be great.
Yeah.
Sure. Hang on one second, Dan, and let's just make sure that board members, do you need, or committee members, do you need more of a background or explanation, or are you all right to have Dan just start in with the concerns we had? I think Member Booth is saying he'd like a little more background. Tanya?
Sure. Sorry about that. Okay, so we came to committee last month. David Soleil, who is no longer with us, had prepared the memo that you see on the screen. These are the items that DCFS will be permitted to have access to. And really it's just the current name, the school that the student attends, the student ID number, their date of birth. And so what happens is when a call comes into the DCFS hotline, with an allegation of abuse or neglect against a child, then it comes into what we call Child Protective Services intake. And there's a group of intake workers that work there who would be receiving the call, and they put in the information. And oftentimes, if a CPS worker has to respond to the school, sometimes they have to respond within an hour. It takes a lot of time for them sometimes to track down the school that the child is attending. So they'll go out to the school that they might think that the child attends, and the child is not attending there, and then it takes them a lot of time to try to track that down. They have a legal obligation sometimes to meet with the child within a certain time frame. They need to be able to locate the child and interview them. And this is our effort to provide them with the information so that the intake workers can just add the school that the child is attending to the current information that they send to the investigator, to cut out that time that they have to spend time figuring out which school that the child is attending.
Right.
So that's, and again, we had talked about with DCFS who might be that group that needs to be provided with that information. And we determined that it would be fine to just provide the information to the small group of Child Protective Services workers in that office, so that we're not providing it to a large amount of people. It would just be the workers that work for intake, their administrator, their supervisors, and maybe a few others within DCFS. And I'll be happy to answer any other questions.
And just to clarify, those things listed on the left of the screen is the total amount of information that this DCFS individual would get. Is that right?
That's correct. And so they would log into the information data gateway. And these are the only elements that they would be able to look up. They would be able to put in the name of the child, the date of birth, and then this is the elements that they would have access to.
Okay.
And David also did provide last month just a statement saying that this is in line with FERPA and with state statute, and that this would be allowable in his estimation. So.
And so if I do see a hand, and if Dan was going to answer questions rather than provide background, is it okay with you folks, Dan, Tanya, that we go to the questions first, so we address the questions today, because we can have a whole new set of questions today. So, Member Hymas.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, Chair. I wasn't sure if they were going to just start going on the questions, or if you prefer that I ask my questions.
Yo, I'd rather, please.
Okay, so a couple of questions that I had for last month, and I appreciate you being here, by the way, to answer these questions. One of them is, do they have access all the time? So does DCFS, they can, at any time they feel, can look into school systems? Do they have that access at any time?
Go ahead, Dan, or Tanya, whichever.
Kara, may I answer that? Yeah, I'll answer that. So thank you, Board Member Hymas, for that question. So from my understanding, what would happen is when CPS, when the intake workers receive that allegation and they need to look up the information, yes, these are the elements that they would have access to. So they don't have access to any other information or any other school systems, only the data information gateway.
But I think, and we may be missing it, but I don't know if you want me to explain or you, Matt, but what he's asking is, so the access is constant, that a DCFS worker can log in at any time and get this information on any child. Is that what you're asking, Matt, or is it something different?
That's it. Thank you, Carol.
It looks like Aaron Bruff can answer that question. So
let's try Aaron now. Okay, go ahead, Aaron.
Good morning, Aaron Bruff with Data and Statistics. And to answer your question, yes, the system, the data gateway with the permission levels would allow the user, so we'll say whoever it is at DCFS would have the permission. So as long as the system is up and running, they can log in and do a search. So it doesn't mean that they're they're always having access. Obviously, they're logging into the secure system. Once they've logged into the system, they're behind that firewall. They can go through, find that information that comes out. So as long as that information exists within our systems, yes, they can look that up, and it has historic records. So it goes back to the beginning of whenever that student had entered into our system, be it kindergarten or through 12th grade.
But let me clarify something, and then Matt, I'll come back to you because your hand's still up, and I don't want to hijack your question, but even if the DCFS worker can get in there, who is, by the way, bound by his own professional standards and some of the same professional standards that our office employees would be bound by. But when you say he can get in there, all he has access to is that list on the left. He can't, there's nothing, even if he's in the system all the time, that is the most access he can have. Is that right?
And if I can respond to it, yes, and it's a single student at a time. This would not be a batch search process. You would have to look up one student, you get the results. And if you need to look up another student, you'd go and do it, that result. So this is not a batch process or an API connection of any sort.
Or a fishing expedition, I guess. Okay, Member Hymas, do you want to continue?
Yeah, so I guess that's kind of the concern, is that there's this it's not a fear, but a concern that the DCFS could see something and then initiate their own investigation without any outreach from the school or anybody except for the employee of DCFS. How do we alleviate concerns to our constituents who are worried about Big Brother, if you will, coming in and saying, no, your kid hasn't attended for this much time. We see that, we're taking over.
That's a clear question. Dan or Tanya, whichever one of you. Or
I'll just
Erin.
answer really fast. So they do not have access to attendance. So I'm not sure that if that would be able to happen. They only have access to the schools and the information on the screen.
But just to clarify, because we discussed this last time, with the SSID or the LEA student ID, they would have access to grades, attendance, and then all this stuff on here.
Someone's saying
Unless I'm
no.
mistaken.
Someone's saying no, Matt. Let's see what the true answer is. Let's
Okay.
hear from, maybe we have two people whose hands are up. Katie, who's filling in, who's the interim for David Slay, and then we have Dan Rich from DHS. So Katie, would you answer that first and then go to Dan?
Sure, thank you. So Katie Chalice, I'm a student data privacy auditor. I listened to this meeting last month, and it occurred to me that I thought the committee might benefit from a brief explanation of the data systems that are in play here. So the data gateway has data that USBE houses, and it's limited. It's a lot of data, but it's not everything that an LEA has. And even then, this interface would only show these limited pieces of information for the intake worker. I think we're probably on the same page at that point. But a totally separate system, the one that is probably the most sensitive in my view, is the LEA's Student Information System, or SIS. And Board Member Hymas, I remember you last month were concerned about if a caseworker can, or an intake worker can obtain a student's SSID or their LEA student ID, which is usually a shorter number. They sometimes call it the lunch number. If someone could obtain that, then they would be able to sign in to the SIS. That was my understanding of the question, and that's a valid concern. What I wanted to make clear is that the student number or the SSID alone would never be sufficient to sign into an SIS. There's always going to be a separate password. And in many cases, the username, the sign-in might not even be the SSID or the student ID. I remember, Board Member Hymas, you brought up Compass last time, and it turns out that with the Compass SIS, sure enough, you can type in I think it was the SSID. That's the first piece of information. But these folks would never have access to the password that's associated with that. And to the point about resetting the password, a password reset would then be going to the email of the person that owns the account. So I think it's important for everybody to understand that those two systems are fully separate. And for an intake worker to have access to the SSID or this LEA student number is really not super useful unless you have other information combined with it, like a password.
Member
I mean,
Klein,
useful in terms of being nefarious.
Thank you. And Carol, that answers my questions. I do have one. I see other hands, and I know that everybody has all three probably have fantastic answers. I'll just ask one last question, hopefully, before I relinquish my time here. Is it possible for DCFS to initiate its own report through this data?
Katie or Dan, whichever one of you.
I don't know that the data here could ever be used in an accusatory way. There's nothing about a student's name that would indicate that a report needed to be generated, for example. So I'm guessing the answer is a straight up no, but I'll let Dan confirm that.
Dan?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it would be a no.
And Dan, would you maybe give your name and your affiliation as you start?
Oh, yeah, no worries. So my name is Dan Rich. I'm a program administrator for the Division of Child and Family Services. My focus is CPS, so the investigations of the calls that come into DCFS.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yes. So the information that we have here that would be available to the intake worker is not enough for an individual to open an investigation. And I just wanted to add kind of to that previous conversation, the intake worker would be the individual that would have access to this information. It wouldn't be the investigating worker. So intake would solely use it to find a school information about, where the student is at. So they can give that to the investigator to say, this child is at such and such school. So it allows the worker to save some time, be able to understand where to locate the child and get to the child quickly. But as far as opening an investigation, there's not enough information to open it, nor would our intake staff. I would hope, I would say pretty confidently our intake staff are not going to go through and look at this information to open an investigation. One, they're super, super busy and it just wouldn't be enough information.
Thanks, Dan. Member Matt, did that give you enough information for now?
Yeah, it does. It does for now. And and I heard this last month as well. I know that DCFS has regulations on their staff, right? That say, hey, this should not be done. Our concern and every constituent's concern is not whether or not it should be done, but can it be done, right? If somebody were to do that. So that's the assurances that I'm looking for. I'm positive that your staff, Dan is fantastic, but maybe not always. You might get somebody who's not. So we just want to make sure that this is set up for the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And let me go to Aaron Bruff on the USB staff to add to this. Go ahead, Aaron.
Thank you. Again, I just wanted to share with the group that before we started this meeting, I just went in and I tested the system to make sure that there is nothing they could get further. So I'm just giving back to the committee member, just say the assurance that yes, we took a look at this. We looked at it seriously as I worked back with David Slay as this was getting set up. We looked at the permission levels within the data gateway, which are multiples. Different individuals, according to their positions and their needs, have different access. This access level only allows what you see is being displayed on the screen. We've gone in, we've tested it. There's nothing they can get further beyond that as an assurance. And I also sent in some screenshots prior to Angie. We don't know if we're going to use them or not, but just so you know, we've actually tested the system, say, can they get any further? Is there any bugs in the system that we're not aware of? And we went through and we tested it. It's like, nope, it's solid. We're good here.
Thank you, Aaron. Member Klein.
Yes. Thank you for clarifying some of these things. That's super helpful. Couple questions. Is DCFS ever allowed to initiate an investigation, like whether in the realm of schools or outside? Is just curious on that. Or does it have to, can they only go investigate something that's reported to them?
Dan, maybe?
Yeah, I would be happy to answer that. Yes, they could initiate an investigation, and let me try and give you an example of what that may look like. So sometimes we work with families long term. So we have what we call an ongoing case. So we're working with the family, and that worker would be considered what we call an ongoing worker. So they could be working with a family, and as that worker is working with them, there could be another incident of abuse or neglect that the worker becomes aware of. So maybe the worker becomes aware of another incident of physical abuse per se. That worker could call our intake staff and say, I'm working with this family. There was another incident of physical abuse. Here's the details of the physical abuse. And it would then lead to an investigation or a CPS investigation at that point. So they do have that ability to do it. It does not occur that often, but there are times where workers may be aware of abuse or neglect that's occurring and call it in so we can set up a formal investigation.
Okay, thank you. And then earlier, Tanya, alluded again to the idea that DCFS sometimes has to locate a child quickly, sometimes within an hour. Can you speak to why would that be the case? Why would 1 hour be? I mean, if the kid is already at school for the full day, what is the urgency? What harm are they in if they're at school?
Dan?
Yeah, we do have a priority for 1 hour, and I do want to be upfront. We rarely, if ever, use that priority of 1 hour. We do have that option if most of the times the priority time frame of 1 hour will be utilized if law enforcement's there and law enforcement's like, we need you to respond right now. We're taking a parent into custody, or there's a situation that deems necessary for this child to be seen in that hour time frame. But once again, very rarely is it used, and very rarely would it ever be used if the child is at school, because the school should be a safe environment for that child. But we still want to see the children quickly. We do also have a priority time frame of 24 hours. Usually our 24-hour timeframes are for physical abuse, because if the child has a mark on their body that has resulted from physical abuse, we want to see the child as quick as possible so we can see that injury, document the injury, and move forward. So there are times where we do want to get out as quick as possible.
Thanks, Dan. Natalie, do you have other questions?
Yeah, I just, how often is there a situation like that? You said not very often, right? So typically we would have time to do a little more digging. They would have time to make a phone call to the district or to USBE to have that information looked up for them, correct?
Yeah, for those cases where the worker's trying to get out and see an injury per se, they should have enough time to call a district or call a phone number. And I know that that was an option that was discussed. Is there a number that the worker can call to gather this information? And I think one of the questions that came up in last meeting, and I apologize if I get it incorrect, but the question was how many calls could that possibly result in if DCFS is calling a specific
That was my
individual?
next question, yes. What kind of volume would that create?
And that is a hard question to answer. I would say on average, we open 70 to 80 cases a day throughout the state of Utah. Now that's on average. It can fluctuate, definitely. But there are several
involving
cases.
School children?
No, that would just be in general. So a part of those would be involving school kids. I don't have the numbers broken out specifically of how many school kids per day, but I would say you could see anywhere from about 40 to 50. I mean, I know when I did my casework as a caseworker, I probably called the school at least once or twice a day, probably. And that was just me alone as one worker. So it could result in a significant number. I apologize, I don't have an exact number, but if we're looking for the whole state of Utah, you could see, I'd say 40 to 50 calls possibly in a day.
Okay, Member Klein, still?
So if that that would be for the whole state of Utah. And if they were just calling the district, then each district would probably get far fewer than if it all went to a central location. So it would be much more manageable if they were just to call a district person to get that information, correct?
That'd be correct. Yeah.
Well, and I want to point out that it's not just districts. We've also got charter schools that have much smaller front office staffs and don't necessarily have the support staff that a Granite School District has. So that
Yeah,
size
usually smaller numbers of students too, so it'd probably be easier for them to identify and locate the student.
I think it depends. But let me add one more thing, and then I'll go to Member Davis who has questions. I think that one of the things I don't want to lose here is that one of the big efforts from the state law enforcement and Attorney General's office and county attorneys lately has been reporting child abuse. So we're balancing that necessity, that effort, that desire on all of our parts, reporting child abuse, addressing child abuse. We're balancing it against, as I see it, a very slim chance that some rogue employee at DCFS who has, I think the same professional standards as USBE employees might do something inappropriate. So I think it's important to remember our goal, and that is helping children quickly and without, in the safest, most quick way. So I don't want to lose that balance of doing those things. Member Davis and then Member Booth.
Just trying to make sure I have clarity. So with this, you would have the exact same access to the exact same information. You would just call a person to get it other than looking it up. Is that correct? If you called our office to get this, you would have the access to the exact same information. And then the other question is, how do you get it now? Probably we've talked about that along the way and I forgot. Are you calling our office or the schools, or how is this happening now?
Dan, that goes back to our original problem, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So how we're getting the information now, to the best of my knowledge, now granted, it could be different amongst different areas of the state of Utah, but most individuals are calling the district. So if I work so for example, when I did all my casework, I worked in West Valley. So I worked a lot with Granite School District. So I would call them and gather that information. One of the things that this process could help alleviate though is, for example, when I was working in West Valley and I was working with the Granite School District, I would have to send some information to the school district, my name, my contact information, all of that. So when I called them, they could verify, okay, Dan Rich is good to give information to. But that was with Granite. So then if I had a child that maybe left the Granite School District and went to Jordan School District, I couldn't call Jordan School District because I wasn't on their approval list. I would then have to send more information to Jordan School District and say, hey, my name's Dan Rich, I work with the division, here's my ID. Can I be on your list for approval to gather this information? So sometimes it was difficult to get the information just because we were working with numerous different school districts. Whereas this new process, if our intake staff had it, we wouldn't have to continually send in information to the district saying, hey, we got a new worker, here's their information, put them on the approval list for that. So it could help alleviate that process. But Member Davis, hopefully this is answering your question. We would typically contact the districts to get this information, and it would be the same information. The districts would just say, oh yeah, Johnny goes to such and such school. And that's all we would ask is, what school do they attend? And they say, yeah, they attend this school.
Thank you, Chair. May I follow up?
Yes.
So we have increasing amounts of school choice, and not everybody is going to district schools. So I'm wondering how, you're finding out, if a child's in the district or in a charter or in the homeschool or what have you. It seems like it would streamline the process for us to give the approval. And how does that approval come about? I mean, do we do a background check? Are you fingerprinted? I mean, how do the districts give approval, and what would we do to give approval? And what would the process be and cost to get that up and going? I know the cost to hire someone here to try to streamline all the calls would be, we obviously don't have FTE for that. So what would the process be to get approval done here?
That may not be a Dan Rich question. Angie, is your audio working? Could you speak to that maybe?
Chair,
Can you hear me now?
Tanya, go ahead then. If Angie may not, so go ahead, Tanya.
Chair, I was just gonna ask that Aaron Bruff chime in here, but also let you know that any person that works for DCFS already does go through background checks and all those approvals in order to have access. But Aaron, if you could speak to how we would give these individuals access, that would be great.
Yes, Aaron, please.
And then I have a quick follow-up.
Sure. Aaron, go ahead.
So the access process really is, we receive the request of the individuals that need to have the access. We take it, it's a hand entry into the system. Someone on my team would go through and we create the account for the individual and set it, and we would monitor that. So that would be the process. They would send me an email and a name, basically first name, last name, email. I would receive that from someone like Dan, who we would say that's the authorizer, and we go through and set it up. So that would be basically how we do it.
So let me make sure I understand. And so instead of the DCFS worker going into our system to see this limited information, that same DCFS worker would have to send you an email every time?
No, just once.
Or are we talking about just you would approve these individuals and then he could have access?
Great follow up. Yes, great question. What would happen would be is we, with the MOU or the agreement, once it got in place, there would be a trusted source that I would know on DCFS side. Dan, for example, he would send me a list and saying, add these accounts. I'd add the accounts. If someone left and they didn't work there anymore, he would send me an update, say, delete these accounts. That's the process that we do with onboarding any new staff or when someone leaves. That's the same kind of process. We get an email, it comes in, it sets it up. If the account is not used, it automatically locks after a year process. So if we miss someone, there is that little catch. That's primarily set up for educators, but again, that's the process that we go through. Someone comes here, the onboard, we get it, we log them in, create the account. That account is active then, as long as that individual's working there. And then when they leave for whatever purpose, then I would get and now they're gone, I would go in and delete out the account and remove access.
And I guess maybe I'll go to somebody else, but I think I'm not making myself clear. I'm saying that just approves the employee. That doesn't address who gets into the system. Is that right, Aaron? It's just that's a DCFS employee person process. Is that right?
So I apologize if I'm not answering it correctly.
No,
again, when you say an employee, yes, the employee sends me. So again, Dan would send me a list of employees with their email. That email becomes the account login. The account login then is set up with the correct permissions. And then
Right.
the employee uses that, it's unique to that individual, can log in and access the student search.
So, okay, so yeah, stop for a sec. So that means that the employee then, after approval by you or acceptance by you, then that employee still goes directly to that student information.
Correct.
Okay. And that's the only difference between the approval by DCFS versus approval by you. Is that the distinction?
Yeah, DCFS would send their verification. I validate it and I set it. And then, yes. And then once it's set, then they have access.
Member Davis, you had to follow up or other stuff.
Just a quick follow-up. How many people per office? I know you have geographic offices. are we talking about would have access? I mean, if you have like 100 employees, is it possible to limit that down to 5 key employees? Or what are the numbers we're talking about that would be, not that it matters hugely because you get this information anyway by doing extra work, but I'm just wondering scale wise, if there's a way to kind of keep it reined in, just so for comfort's sake.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for us, it would be our intake staff, and our intake staff is for the whole state of Utah. So we have one office, they take all the phone calls for the whole state of Utah. And that intake staff, when fully staffed, is 28 intake members. So there's 28 staff, there's 4 supervisors, 1 administrator. So we're looking at about, 40, we're looking at what, 43 there, or sorry, 33 there. But then we would also maybe look at having some individuals in the different regions. DCFS is broken up into 5 regions throughout the state, so 5 geographical regions. So we would look at max, probably, we talked about this the other day, 44 in total, maybe 44 people. So it'd be mainly our intake staff, which would comprise 33 of them, and then maybe some of the ones in our individual regions if needs be.
Member Davis, are you?
Thank you.
Okay.
No, that answers my question.
Thank you. Member Booth.
So when a DCFS staff member is no longer employed and goes on to other employment, what prevents them from being able to log in and access this information? What gateways or controls do we have on the specific people that are working for DCFS in the intake division, so that only those people, and while they are currently employed, have access?
Dan?
Yeah, like Aaron was saying earlier, if an employee leaves, we can notify and say, hey, this employee's left, can you take them off? But this may be a better question for Aaron. If it's using their state email address as, their login or whatever it may be, their state email, when they leave the state, that email is terminated. They can no longer use or access that email at all. So I don't know if that being terminated would help with that system. I think Aaron may be able to answer that.
Aaron, do you have
Yes.
anything to add?
Yeah, I can answer that. So current system. So when we say current system, data gateway, when we would need to receive notification from DCFS, like we do with every partner, and that's usually spelled out in the sharing agreement. When someone leaves, you need to notify us. They notify us, we remove it from the account. In the USIMS development, so this is stuff that's happening right now. It's not done. The plan is to use, for example, the long story short is basically it would become deactivated when they left the agency themselves, because you'd be using each agency's Active Directory control and constraints. So that's the modernization that is happening. That's not in place yet. So we still require that the partners would notify us saying, hey, this person has left. And that actually happens at a regular basis. I get emails maybe once, twice a month saying, hey, this person's left. And I just go in and we deactivate it. It doesn't deactivate, obviously, until I go in and deactivate it. So let's say if there's disgruntled, I'm throwing a hypothetical, I'm just letting, board member Booth realize if someone left, they would still have access. But as soon as we get the notification, we go in and we take care of that day. And it's always been that day. Once we receive it, we go in, we remove access, make sure there's no gap in that.
Member Booth? Randy, do you have other questions? You're muted, I think, Randy. He looks like he's okay. Okay, thank you. Member Klein, you have additional questions?
Yeah, just a quick one. On the DCFS just receives calls for domestic violence. Is that correct? Or if a child is in danger at school from a potential staff member, do you ever get calls like that? where staff is reported
Thanks,
for being abusive?
Dan?
Yes, yeah, we will get calls for staff that have been abusive. So we'll get a call on any abuse or neglect of a child. So if it involves an adult and there is a concern of abuse or neglect, whether it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, whatever it may be, if there is that adult and there is a minor, we'll get a call regardless of who the adult is. So we have gotten calls regarding school personnel.
So in that case, you would need to move quickly.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see no further hands. Natalie, you can put yours down, I think, if you're finished. I don't see any further hands. Somebody like to make a motion?
I'll do it.
Member Davis.
Someone will put the language up. I recommend that the committee approves the data sharing agreement with the Division of Child and Family Services, DCFS, and I'd like to speak to the motion if we don't need a second in here, right?
Pardon me?
We don't need a second in committee, right?
No, that's right. Go ahead then. Speak to your motion. And then I'll read it.
Okay. I just feel like, we've got a lot of children in the state that are in precarious positions. I just went last week and toured the Children's Justice Center in Provo, and I was just amazed to find that they're seeing 5,000 children, for different forms of physical and sexual abuse and things like this. And I'm just, if these folks are going to have access to this data anyway, and removing one more step to get them the information more quickly can help a child in more streamlined ways, then that's why I would vote for this. And I don't know if this is appropriate, so I'll make it really fast. I just want to thank those employees who are here from DCFS and our office also, who help and coordinate with them, for caring about the kids in our communities and doing these really hard jobs. Even just my limited exposure as a principal made me say every day, I could never work for DCFS. I can barely handle the amount of details I have on this end. So thank you to you and your help that you give to the kids in the state.
Thank you, Cindy. And I think I should have placed that motion before she made that comment, but I'll do it now. The motion was that the committee approves the data sharing agreement with DCFS. And now a further discussion, Mr. Hymas.
I'm sorry, I just had one last question just for DCFS before I make a deciding vote here,
Sure,
if that's appropriate, Chair.
absolutely.
What happens when a family, and I know that this probably has nothing to do with the data sharing, but what happens when a family disputes the claim or says that didn't happen, or a staff member or any adult, right? What happens there does DCFS push forward? Just for my understanding, what happens with the counter claims that there is nothing going on?
Dan, can you respond to that?
Oh, yes. So that is a great question. So there's a couple different things. So, and hopefully I answer your question the way that you're asking. So when an investigator goes out and does the investigation, does the assessment of the concerns, they may have a child that's saying, hey, this is what's occurring. And we may talk to the parent, and the parent says, no, this is not occurring. We try and gather as much information as possible. So we'll talk to collateral. So for example, we'll talk to schools. So maybe it's the person who the child disclosed to, or maybe somebody that sees the child. It could also be a therapist. It could be somebody else in the home that knows the child. So we're going to try and gather as much information as possible to make the appropriate finding, because there are times where people are saying, no, this didn't occur, yet I have a child saying, yes, it did occur, or I may have somebody else saying, yes, it occurred. So we're going to make an assessment of the information that we've gathered. Once I've made a finding, so DCFS makes a finding of supported or unsupported. Supported means we believe abuse or neglect occurred. Unsupported means we don't have enough information to say abuse or neglect occurred. If I do make a finding of supported against an individual, that individual still has legal rights to request what's called an administrative hearing, to go in front of an administrative judge and say, hey, you know what, I don't agree with the division. So they have that ability to go in front of an administrative judge, present their information, and then DCFS will also present their information. And an administrative judge at that point would take it into consideration as to whether that finding should still stay as a supported finding or not a supported finding. Member Hymas, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, Dan. Thank you. I just want to make sure that, you know, there's things that come forward, and whenever a parent is contacted by DCFS, it's never a good thing, right? I mean, I don't think any parent has been like, oh, I'm so happy that I went through this experience. Maybe in the long run, honestly, but the initial is just shock for some. Others, it's like, okay, here I am. I'm like this. Maybe this should have happened sooner. But I worry about people. I worry about children first and foremost. But I also worry about people who are just living lives, and all of a sudden this happens, and they're like, "What the heck just happened? I don't know what's going on." Right? And so I want to make sure that we're doing a good job. If we're partnering with DCFS to say, yeah, we want to make sure that everybody's best interest is in mind here. So thank you, Dan, for that.
Thank you. And I appreciate hearing that there are two opportunities for a person to explain his role. I think that's something I hadn't really internalized either. Thank you. Member Klein, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, just quick while we still have Dan, since I doubt you'll be here in our next meeting. When you get a report and you go and find a child, is the protocol always to immediately take that child into custody? Or is that just like the last option and you exhaust a lot of other things in between?
Yes, yeah, removal is always the last option. We try and do everything that we can to ensure the child's safety. Just to give you a quick explanation of it. So when we go out and we see a child, there's very, very, very few times where we go out and see a child and say, this child needs to be removed right now. There are situations where that does occur, but like I said, very, very rare. What we want to do is gather as much information as possible. We do different safety assessments. We do the interviews with the families. We have a new process that we're putting into place called the Family Action Meeting, where we bring the family together and say, hey, family and extended family, we want to pull in like as many family members as possible to say, hey, can we create safety for this child? Can we make sure that the child can remain safely at home or in another environment, whatever that may look like. But yes, removal is not the first option. It's typically the last. It's only if we have to.
Thank you. Member Klein?
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have the motion and it's before us with the members. Please vote. Committee members. And I see the vote is unanimous in approving this agreement. Thank you so much for your patience and your expertise in entertaining our questions. Thanks so much. And thanks, Tanya, for your leadership. And I don't mean to raise my hand.
Can I say a quick comment?
Yes.
I just want to make clear my vote is to move it forward. That doesn't mean I'm completely sold on this yet, but I agree to move it forward.
That's helpful. Thank you. And thanks again, folks, for attending, and we'll have another discussion with the board next month. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is I'm looking for your help because I can't find that page really quickly, Angie.
Chair Lear, can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Yay. Great. So the next item, so just wanted to remind you, we skipped public comment because neither of our speakers had entered the room yet. But Brad Nelson, who is one of our public comment speakers, has joined us. I didn't know if you wanted to move to that and just let you know that the second person has sent me a message that they will not be speaking. You could move to that right now. And then after that, we still don't have our Jeff and Tracy Nuttall here for item number 2. So if they have not arrived after public comment, I propose we move to item number 4, the special.
Yes. In fact, let's just plan to do that. And yes, Brad Nelson would be appropriate as the public comment now. So Brad, wherever I see you on the screen, go ahead and make your public comment. Please take 2 to 3 minutes or less.
Thank you. Actually, it'll be pretty brief. First of all, I just want to say I appreciate the efforts of Leah's staff with the USBE clarifying and going over and over and over these rules. I know it's hard, and the more ambiguity we get rid of, the better. My question was in section XU of the new special education funding rules. Well, the modification to it, just a little bit of clarification in the section where they're talking about excess costs. There's a little bit of confusion of what the nominator is and the denominator is for figuring out excess costs. I think there needs to be in 2XU 2B a clarification that it is the average general education costs create the minimum from which special education costs would exceed, because it's a little ambiguous there whether that's all education costs of the LEA or just the general education costs, which I think is the intent. Something to look at. And then also in that B and C of that section, it just it talks about a individual student, and looking for a little bit of clarity because it almost sounds like the LEAs are responsible to account for the costs of special education by individual student, and I'm looking for clarity there that is either the case or not. I assume it is not, because that would be prohibitive. And then the last comment that they can either address or not would be in XU 6. This is existing language now, but if they could maybe use this opportunity to clarify B of XU 6B, that it says that the task does not require additional time beyond what is required to address the needs of one student with a disability. That to me is ambiguous, and I don't understand it, and I work in it. So maybe if they could take this opportunity to clarify that. But that's all the comments I have.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson, would you like to identify the school that you work with?
Yeah, I'm an executive director at Spectrum Academy Charter Schools.
Thank you very much. And we won't have the individuals, the experts speak to this right this moment, because they received 350 plus comments.
Oh, geez.
So we will have them address your concerns as part of the rest of their explanation to us. So thank you very much for taking the time to attend.
Chair Lear,
Yes, ma'am.
can I ask Brad to repeat that last, which section was that?
It was X.U 6B, which is existing language that is not currently looking to be changed, but it is to me ambiguous. Maybe, again, I know when they get into writing these things, it seems like, everybody gets it, but again, I deal with this all day, every day, and I don't understand what that means.
That's helpful. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you. Thanks, Member Hymas. Now after that public comment, let's turn first to Laura Lee. I'm thinking you're the one that's Laura Lee Gillespie. Dr. Laura Lee Gillespie I'm not sure, is going to describe and introduce this item for us.
Actually, Leah is going to start us out.
Okay, that would be Dr. Leah. Thank you.
I just want to make sure you still wanted to skip the previous item, Chair Lear, and go to this one.
Yes, we've got people we're waiting for, so go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. Leah Voorhees, Assistant Superintendent of Student Support, which includes being the State Director of Special Education. So we are bringing to the committee today proposed updates to the Special Education Rules Manual, which is incorporated by reference into R277-750, which is the next item on the agenda. And we incorporate the rules manual by reference because it is almost 300 pages, and having a rule that is 300 pages is obviously a lot. So we'll be going over the proposed updates very quickly, and then in the next item, you would determine whether or not you want to incorporate the proposed updated manual into R27750. So let me tell you the impetus quickly for bringing up proposed updates to you. The impetus is threefold. First of all, if you remember a little, just under a year ago, the Utah Special Education Advisory Panel brought a recommendation to you regarding inclusionary practices. And as a result of that recommendation, you, the board, required us in special education, you directed me to update the rules to require that LEAs outline meaningful inclusionary practices in their policies and procedures manual. So that is one of the reasons that we have brought updates to the rules for you, because you directed us to. The second reason is in the recent legislative session, the statute regarding special education was updated, and thus the rules need to align to the update in the statute. The majority of the updates related to the alignment of statute are in section X of the rules. And there are just a couple other word changes, but the majority relates to section X. The third impetus is that we receive public comment and feedback and requests for clarification about the rules throughout the implementation of the rules in between updates. And we keep track of them and note them. And when it comes time to do an update, we bring them all out and consider them and make clarifications based on requests from the field. So we have included a couple requests from the field in the proposed updates that we've been holding on to since the last time you updated the rules. So we went through those three, all of the items in those three rules, or those three reasons for updating the rules and proposed updates. We sent out a version, slightly different than the one you see today, to all of our stakeholders in the disability community across the state of Utah. We sent a Qualtrics survey with the update that guided people through reading each section. There are 10 sections in the rules, reading each section and then providing feedback on any proposed updates in that section. So there were just 10 questions on the Qualtrics survey. We received over 330, almost 340 distinct responses to that survey from either individuals or groups. The groups, quickly to tell you who we sent that to: LEA special education directors, special education teachers, and the paraprofessionals with whom we have email addresses through our newsletter. The Utah Parent Center, the PTA Special Needs Committee, the Disability Law Center, Legislative Coalition for People with Disabilities, the Coordinating Council for People with Disabilities, which is enacted by statute. All of the state agencies who serve individuals with disabilities, all the nonprofit organizations with whom we have relationships that serve students with disabilities, and of course the Utah Special Education Advisory Panel. So we received comments from every one of the groups, from individuals and or from groups, from all of them, which is wonderful. We had so much feedback. So Laura Lee largely, but our team went through all of that feedback and collated it and has provided for you a document that is several pages long that goes through the themes of the feedback. And we received tons of feedback that said, this is great. Thank you so much for these proposed updates. And then we received feedback that was more substantive. Have you considered this? Why this? Laura Lee created a document for you that goes through each of those substantive feedback items and responds whether or not we proposed in the version that you are seeing today to make the update based on the feedback, and why or why not. And some of them we did, some of them we incorporated the substantive changes based on feedback, and some of them we didn't, and we have responded with a why or why not. And then
And can I stop you just for a minute, Leah, and ask Member Hymas if your question can wait, and you're just in the queue, or you have a question specific to what she's talking about now?
My question is specific. I'll get to the other stuff later, Chair, if it's okay.
Sure.
Can I just ask quickly if this went to the financial staff as well, or did it? Okay, so not to the financial staff, just to the special ed directors.
So so thank you, Chair. So the survey went to disability related stakeholders.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Leah.
Thank you for the question. So then and since the survey closed, we've received more feedback including I presented the documents that you have before you today to the Superintendents Association meeting earlier this week, which Mr. Van Tassel from the Utah Association of Public Charter Schools and Utah Charter School Board member Cindy Phillips also attend, and did receive some feedback from them at that time, and we've received some other feedback at that since that time. So Laura Lee, it has a document, a really quick front and back 1-page document to share with you that goes over just the substantive proposals that we are recommending in the current version that you see. Since we have uploaded all of these documents for backup last week, we have received some other feedback. We've received 4, I think, Laura Lee, other comments from individuals or groups, which we can respond to in general, like we are responding to all of this feedback, and let you know when Laura Lee finishes the recommendations that we would make for possible amendments to the current version that you see. Does that make sense, Chair Leah?
Yes, based on very recent feedback.
Very recent feedback. Exactly.
Okay, sure. So next thing you want us to do is Laura Lee to go through these general substantive ideas, right?
If that would be the method that would be most helpful.
Member Hymas?
Yeah, can I just interrupt for a second? Would it be beneficial to send, I mean, I know it would be beneficial, and I don't know what the time, whatever is, but to send this to financial people, I mean, they are involved as well, are they not? This would go to Dr. Voorhees if it's a question that can be answered.
Sure. Leah, my thinking is that that's going to be usually shared in the school between the two, but go ahead, Leah, if you want to answer that question.
So we certainly don't have any opposition to that. Deputy Superintendent Jones generally shares all law updates with business administrators, for instance. The original survey that we put out was was very specific to the disability community because they generally aren't alerted to the process, to your processes, unless somebody cues them. Like superintendents and business administrators, they track what you're doing and what's going on with your rules and updates, where the disability community doesn't necessarily, unless we cue them. And that was really the purpose, to prompt the disability community to know that that you were working on updating the rules, and to give them the opportunity to provide feedback. We'll accept and are happy to request, proactively, feedback from anyone. The purpose of this survey was specifically to prompt the disability community to know that you are working on the rules, and if they had comments, to share them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Leah. Go ahead, then. I think the next step is to talk through these general changes with Laura Lee.
My name is Laura Lee Gillespie. I'm the Utah Program Improvement Planning System, or often referred to as UPIPS coordinator for the State Board of Education. In looking at these rules, I want to note that one of the things that we did was went back to the Code of Federal Regulations to ensure alignment. So you will see that throughout some of the changes. We updated definitions around these following areas. In particular, especially the behavior intervention and functional behavior assessment was based on school psychologists and those in the field. New definitions were added to try to tie in some respects to the LETRS training. So again, we're including students with disabilities as general education students first. Clarification on some information related to the Office of Special Education Programs guidance around discipline and shortened school days was also included in our definitions. If I can have you scroll up.
Whoever's driving.
Yeah, I don't know who's driving.
Yeah.
In terms of identification, location, and evaluation, this is section 2 of the rules. Again, including the science of reading definition. There is a definition in the United States Code, as well as a state board definition we wanted to ensure that we included. Based on feedback from the field, the disability category of developmental delay in our rules has been ages 3 through 7 since I've been involved in special ed. So, but the federal regulations are 3 through 8, and folks in the field said, we would really like to be consistent with that. We worked with our data folks and made sure that wouldn't mess anything up in terms of reporting data, and it does not. It actually makes it work better. So that recommendation was made. Culturally emotional disturbance as a classification has negative connotations, and many states have changed the name of this disability category to something not so negative. I will say most states have changed this, and this is hands down the one thing that we changed that we had the most comments on in favor of changing it from emotional disturbance to emotional behavioral disability. We had so many comments on this, and we want to ensure that we are doing what's truly reflecting what the disability category is and what qualifications are involved in that. So there's changes to how you qualify that are more consistent with practices in the field now, and the name has changed. So we'll scroll up to the 3rd section. We just added some clarifying language regarding substantial changes to an IEP to ensure parents are involved more specifically. We included language around a post-secondary transition annual IEP goal. This has been a requirement from the Office of Special Education Programs in our reporting for years. So we just included it in the rules because we're required to do it anyway. And then we connected the full educational inclusion or full educational opportunities as outlined in the Code of Federal Regulations to inclusionary practices. Our procedural safeguards in section 4, we again added discipline to align with documentation from the Office of Special Education Programs. We updated state complaint procedures to clarify the filing requirements and time. We wanted to ensure that anyone can file a state complaint in special education. So the school janitor can file a state complaint. We wanted to ensure that personally identifiable information is not provided when a complainant files a complaint and it's not their child. So there's language regarding protection of students' identifiable information. We updated mediation, clarifying timing and communication, and we added requests that an LEA inform a hearing officer or state director of any scheduled or completed meetings. So most of this is procedural and consistent with what the Code of Federal Regulations requires. The discipline procedures did not have many changes. Again, we just included the shortened school day in the change of placement section. Again, this is to align with guidance regarding shortened school days, and added language to expedite due process hearing timelines and the inability to extend that. Students with disabilities in other settings, which is students in private schools, we included language about the Carson Smith Scholarship and the Special Needs Opportunity Scholarship so that it's clearly outlined. It's very basic because they have their own rules and we're not going to repeat those rules here, but we want to make sure that people understand that they are there. We included some language about evaluating students in private schools that is required under proportionate share requirements by our districts, and updated the expenditure language in the calculation. Preschool and post-secondary transition, we just included language regarding the annual IEP goal. So we're just restating what we already stated, and included just some information regarding development of the summary of academic achievement. So when a student who's on an IEP leaves, either graduates or leaves the school setting, they are required to have a summary of academic achievement. So we just outlined some information there. The next section, the responsibilities of the State Board of Education. We updated some language around significant disproportionality that was in the Code of Federal Regulations, but not in our rules, and also outlined the comprehensive coordinated early intervening services. We also updated the licensing to align with the Code of Federal Regulations. Local education agencies, we just added some language about if a new LEA opens, what is the process for them developing policies and procedures? What are the deadlines for them to do that? Because every LEA has to develop their own policies and procedures around these rules. And when a new school comes, then we do that. We updated language again about inclusive practices that aligns with the Code of Federal Regulation requirements for full educational opportunities for students with disabilities. We updated funding prevalence in disabilities to match Code of Federal Regulations. Language regarding the 10-day membership rule. So this is, we have state and board rules around membership and drop in the 10-day, and this is causing some confusion around the requirements to provide FAPE to students who qualify for special education. So we try to get some clarifying language there that ties those two rules together to help LEAs understand what is necessary. And again, updated licensing requirements to align with the code and USBE rules. In the funding section, we updated, we included and developed rule language regarding construction and altering existing facilities. This was an update that came based on SB 134 and is now in the code 53F to 307. And you will see there's several of those that have occurred. We updated the add-on and calculation, the self-contained allowable use, clarified language that federal funds are calculated, allocated, and classified according to specific areas of the code. We also replaced the federal special education funds table to match the state table. So this is to help. It's not that it's changed all that much, and you can go through one of my more in-depth documents to just see what those changes are, but it really hasn't changed all that much. It's just to help with the alignment of the accounting codes so that it actually will make it easier for our business administrators to accomplish what they need to do. And then we updated the permissive use of funds to match the code. And I believe that's everything that's outlined on this list. There are other things that have been brought up, and I don't know how you want to proceed with that at this time.
When you say other things that have been brought up, you mean the more recent concerns that have been raised and that you've also addressed. Is that right?
Yes, and Chair Lear, can I add one of those specifically?
Sure.
Okay, so yesterday, so after I said Angie invited me to the rules update review meeting. I don't know what the direct title is that she does with superintendents and with some charter school representatives. And as a result of that meeting and some questions that were brought up, Mr. Van Tassel and I had a conversation yesterday about the proposed language in XU. And this isn't the same the same question that Mr. Nelson from Spectrum just brought up, but in XU 2C, so down just a tiny bit from what's showing, it says an LEA must spend at least the average annual per student expenditure on the education of an elementary school or secondary school child with a disability before spending special education funds. Okay, a couple things I want to clarify that I clarified yesterday and might may or may not help with the question that Mr. Nelson just brought up. This language is actually copy paste. It's formatted a little bit differently, but it is copy paste from the federal regulations, and which is how Senate Bill 134 is actually written, was right from the federal regulations. So the two important things, we have an excess cost calculator, and in Appendix A to Part 300 of the federal regulations, there's a lot of language with examples of how to do the excess cost calculation. And then a National Technical Assistance Center that OSEP, the Office of Special Education Programs, funds, has actually created an excess cost calculator. And to Mr. Nelson's point, the calculator is by LEA, and then you divide it by the number of kids. You don't have to do the excess cost for each student. So that is an important point. OSEP's language doesn't, I totally agree with Mr. Nelson. OSEP's language does not necessarily denote that, but the calculator certainly does. And the appendix to the CFR certainly does. Okay, so we can certainly add the word aggregate there, or LEA aggregate, if that would be helpful, but the actual calculator and the appendix do denote that it is the LEA, not the student. But in that same section, Mr. Van Tassel's concern was the word before, which is actually in the CFR. However, I've reviewed all of this information back and forth, and we could very easily and without changing the meaning, and I do not believe that it would upset the calculation, because I've got the calculation. I've done it twice now. I think we would be fine to end the sentence and to be at, or to C, excuse me, with a disability period, and delete the rest of C before special education funds are used to pay the excess cost, blah, 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 blah. So end C with a period after the word disability, and that would not mess up the excess cost calculator, and would respond to the concern that has been brought up about that. Yep, right there where the cursor is. Does that make sense, Chair Lear?
It does to me. And if you're telling me nothing's lost in doing that, and it addresses some concerns, then it seems like a good idea. I'm not an expert in the field, and I would look to you for your recommendation. But we have a couple of hands, so now might be a good time, as you're talking about potential changes to what we have before us, that to start having these comments. So if that's okay with you, Leah, okay, and Laura Lee both. Okay, so first, Member Davis.
Yeah, I think we need to get a motion on the table so we can start considering amendments. So if someone will put the motion up, I'll make the motion, and then if we come back to this section, I'll make the amendment.
Thank you. That's a helpful suggestion. And there we go. Go ahead, Member Davis.
I move that the committee approves updates to the special education rules incorporated by reference in R277-750 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Okay, the motion is the committee approves updates to the special education rules incorporated by reference in R277-750 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. That's the motion. Then we'll have discussion. Member Davis.
So I'd like to make an amendment, if we can go back to the screen where the suggested amendment was.
Would it be okay? I've got a motions document up now. And maybe this is what you're thinking. Is this the motion you were going to make, Board Member Davis?
If it has been vetted for legality, yes, I will make it if we've had time to do that.
And is that it's though it says Member Primus, it's your motion?
No, it's actually Board Member Davis, sorry.
Oh, you're gonna do a different motion for her. Okay. So go ahead, Cindy.
I move that the line reads, an LEA must spend at least the average annual per student expenditure on the education of an elementary school or secondary school child with a disability. And then delete the rest.
Okay. The motion is that the section that's noted, small Roman numeral X, U.
And I have a question about my amendment.
2B. We'll come to that in a second. Let me just be amended to drop all language. No, to do it the way to delete everything after disability, right? After the word disability. Here and period. Great. Now the question to your own amendment, Cindy.
Yes. Is there an assumption in this that it's within the fiscal year? Because my understanding has always been every special ed student generates a general ed WPU first and foremost just by being a student in the school. And that is supposed to be spent prior to spending the special ed add-on. Is that not written in law? Does the order not matter legally? Is it just to maintain MOE? It has to be done within the same fiscal year and it could be in any order?
Is that right, Leah or Laura Lee, whichever one of you?
Yeah, I can respond, Chair. Thank you. So the calculation has to be done before. That's the language. You have to calculate it, and you are correct. It is an annual calculation. It has to be done every year. It has to be done before. The funds can be spent simultaneously. You don't have to account, oh, I'm going to spend all these funds. Now I'm going to spend all these funds, right? But the calculation has to be done so that you know that these funds are going to be spent and that you are going to be spending these funds. So excess costs and MOE have a relationship, but they are also distinct. Okay. So excess costs, special education is above and beyond general ed. Yes, you are correct. Every student generally generates one WPU and then another because of special ed, right? And you still have to spend the other one. But MOE is a little bit different. Maintenance of effort is a little bit different in that you spent this much this year. You can't spend less than that next year. So you have to spend at least the general education costs in special ed, and then the special ed costs, that's excess costs. And whatever you spent last year total, you have to spend at least that much next year is
Right.
maintenance of effort. So
Right.
they are related, but they are also
Yeah.
distinct.
So that MOE build up was my question about the fiscal year. You can't just spend only special ed funds and never spend general ed funds year after year. I mean,
Correct.
there's an assumption inherent in this. Does it need to be written that this is referring to a fiscal year or?
So that's a good point. There actually, if you go down further, in 4 and 5, and we don't
It's
need
there.
to switch.
I believe you. It's
But
fine.
in 4 and
It's fine.
5, the supplement versus supplant requirement is outlined, and
Perfect.
that's the point.
Okay.
Oh,
Thank you.
good. Thank you, Member Davis. So your motion's okay, and you don't have other questions, is that right?
Correct.
I
Okay.
had a
Member-
question.
Member Matt,
I
is
had a
this
question
the
on this
motion?
motion.
Right.
Is that okay, Carol?
Yes, please.
If it's inappropriate, let me know. I wondered if this, because Brad from Spectrum brought it up, I wonder if this is what he was looking for. This would help him as a practitioner. And I mean, I know Leah knows what she's talking about, of course, but I just wondered if this satisfied his concern. Is that an appropriate question to ask, Brad, or is I don't even know if he's still here.
Yeah, he's in the room. I don't know. Do you feel comfortable about that, Leah? I know that she had lots and lots of comments and didn't want to single any particular person out, but
That's fair. That's fair.
okay. Thank you. Then we hope it does, or he will, I'm sure, let you know or let Leah know. So other questions or comments to the amendment? Okay, then let's imagine there'll be a number of amendments. I guess let's just vote on them separately. So we have this amendment before us right now. The motion being that the committee amend subsection, and they are Roman numerals, but we'll use the XU2C to delete everything after the word disability. That's the motion. And I don't see any, Matt, do you have a question, additional question to this?
Not
We'll
tonight. I'm just-
ask committee members to please vote. And I see that's unanimous, and we'll move on. We'll move on. Cindy, oh, you got your vote. Matt, did you have another amendment, or that should we just move to yours?
Please, if we could.
Sure.
Now, I understand this is a large document, and going through as fast as I can, right? In the time that I have, I admittedly didn't get to look as closely as I'd like, but there are a few things that I'd like to bring up here. And if it takes too much time, Chair, I don't know if we need to push this, but I will start and you guide me, okay?
Sure. Let's just keep going through them, and I'm sure that Leah will answer as quickly as she can.
Perfect.
So
Perfect.
go ahead.
So
Next motion.
the first one here, I move that the committee remove grade level core curriculum in subsection 50 on line 19. And I'll speak to that if that's okay.
Yes, let me just place the motion. The motion is the committee remove grade level core curriculum in subsection 50 on line 19. Can somebody get us there so we can see the context?
Okay. So
Go ahead. Let's speak to it.
Thank you. Thank you. My concern is that we are limiting IEPs or what can be done for a student. Not all students are on grade level or are receiving grade level instruction. And so with this in here, are we telling them that they have to be receiving this kind of instruction?
Great. Leah, can you speak to that?
Thank you for that question, Board Member Hymas. So this question actually came up the other day in the superintendent's meeting as well. And my response would be no, I do not think we are limiting it. I think it is guiding the instruction of special education students for 3 reasons. First, the definition of specially designed instruction in the top line says as appropriate to the needs of the student. In line A, address the unique needs of the student. So the definition of specially designed instruction is very specific to the student, but not so specific to like the program, right? Especially the whole reason that specially designed instruction exists is to be able to adapt based on student need. The second reason that I don't think this is limiting, I actually think it supports students with disabilities, is if students with disabilities by definition struggle or with academic and functional performance. That's one of the 3 prongs of eligibility. And the purpose of providing specially designed instruction and related services is so that the student can access and make progress in their grade appropriate core. So to give you an example, if a student is, in fact, this is the example that was brought up in the superintendent's meeting day before yesterday. If a student is in 11th grade and reading on the 7th grade reading level, is it appropriate to be providing grade level core curriculum, 11th grade level core curriculum to a student who only can read on a 7th grade level? And the answer is, that's the whole reason special ed exists, because providing the scaffolding, providing the instruction, the support, so that the student isn't learning 7th grade in 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grades. The student is learning 7th grade content, even though the student's reading level may only be on 7th grade. The teacher is adapting that curriculum to be able to allow the student to access it and make progress in it. So, and that's the second reason. So the third reason is that this has been the language in the rules for many years. And this is the current understanding and practice of special education providers and programs across the state. So this is what we are currently doing.
Does that change your desire for that, or do you have further questions?
I always have further questions. I'm sorry. So any instruction that's provided, sorry, as I'm looking at my notes here, any instruction provided that is below grade level, even in an effort to reach grade level, is not SDI. Is that what we're saying?
No. What we're saying is to the end of your statement, instruction that is adapted to be able to support a student to get to the grade level core is specially designed instruction. So students may have splinter skills between the 7th and 11th grade that you're working on. Students may have 7th grade skills that you're working on. Students may have 11th grade skills that you're working on. Working on all of those skills, planning that based on the student's disability, based on the student's unique needs, and providing that instruction is specially designed. That's the process that a special educator goes through. What skills does the student need? Here's the content at 11th grade. What skills does the student need to get there? Okay, we're going to teach this, we're going to teach this, we're going to teach this, and the student can then access 11th grade. So special educators would likely be providing some instruction related to the 7th grade core in order to help the student access the 11th grade core, but they wouldn't be just teaching 7th grade again and again and again and again until the student masters it. Does that help?
Yes, I mean, it does help, but I'm just, if I'm a teacher and I say, okay, I know this is going to work, it's this is going to be helpful. It's for your example, there's 7th grade curriculum that I need to teach here. But you're saying I can't do that. I have to go to 11th grade curriculum, modify it to pretty much look the same as the 7th grade curriculum that's already there. And then it's acceptable. Am I off on that?
Well, I don't, not necessarily modify, but I mean, the definition is adapt. And I don't know if those,
okay, so I can
if that's semantics, but adapting as appropriate.
Yeah, I know that in the reference from the CFR, it has specifically or especially design instruction means adapting as appropriate to the needs, right? I'm sure you're familiar with this. It does not have grade level core curriculum in that. I think that's something that the state has added however long ago, right? It just, this was a thing that obviously stood out to me. And so I don't know if removing it would be a bad thing if it's defined in there already, in trying to keep up with SB 134 and making sure that we're doing all that we can for these kids. I don't see why saying, okay, teachers, here's a little more work for you. Their load is heavy. You know that. I don't need to explain that on here. But if there's something that they can do to say, okay, here's what I'm going to need. I'm going to actually use this 7th grade curriculum or 8th grade or 9th grade in order to help them get to 11th grade, then I don't see an issue with that, but clearly there is.
May I say something?
Sure.
Thank
And
you.
then Member Davis also has a question after that, or I'm assuming related to this motion. So go ahead, Laura Lee, and then Cindy.
So I do want to point out a second component of this rule, which says that we want to ensure access to students to grade level core general curriculum, that the student can meet educational standards within the jurisdiction. So for all general ed students, we have standards, right? We have standards that we expect them to meet. And that is the intent of special ed. We're trying to give them a challenging education just as we would all students. And in so doing, we provide them that specially designed instruction to support them to meet those needs. So to me, that second part of the definition actually supports putting that grade level core curriculum in, because that is what we want for students. We want them to meet the standards. And to your point regarding students with disabilities that are so significant, that is also outlined below there in terms of alternate standards and significant disabilities. So there is exceptions made for that when necessary.
Okay, Member Davis, let's see what you have to add.
I would support leaving the language as it is, just because we've gone around so many times over students having access to grade level content. For example, if a student is in 8th grade, the student should have access to the social studies curriculums. Let's say in 8th grade, it's US history, and the student's learning about the Constitution. It's okay to adapt if all the other students are reading a grade level piece on the Constitution. It's okay to adapt what's happening there and get a reading piece on a 4th grade level that still gives access to the content in the social studies 8th grade curriculum. What we don't want to have happen is a teacher to say, well, this student's never going to be able to read that stuff in 8th grade social studies. So we're, and as an alternate, going to give them the 4th grade social studies materials. Well, then they're reading about states, about, you know, the Utah State understanding social studies curriculum. So I think we have to be really careful that we always allow students to access grade level curriculum, but we fully understand that within that, there are all kinds of adaptations to present levels of learning that are understood in the IEP. And instructionally, you know, you may be working with a 4th grade text to access an 8th grade understanding or concept. I just think it's really important that we don't lose sight of the fact that we're trying to allow students to have access to what their typically developing peers have access to the extent that they can absorb that.
Thanks. Thanks, Cindy. And let me just add, Matt, for 1 second. I'm not an expert in this area, but from some of the work I have done, the bigger problem is sort of what's being alluded to, that it's more often the problem that teachers give students easier work rather than try to adapt adapt to the grade level curriculum where the student should be. And that's what I understand we're aiming for with this. Matt, you have something to add?
Yeah, I think we're on a same, if not similar page here. And I know that Cindy mentioned ultimately going against this motion, but she's saying the same things that and maybe I'm misunderstanding here. The reason I'm asking for this to be removed is not for the end game to stay at the same level, right? And to Laura Lee's point, if it's already in the rule to say, no, your end goal is grade level. What I'm saying is that this restricts people from using other material. As Cindy said, you might have to go to a 4th grade, use that content or that curriculum for a lesson to bring that kid up to speed. That's what I'm hoping, and that's what I'm saying, that this restricts the use of or delivery of, as it's written, grade level curriculum. So I say if we remove it, it says or delivery of instruction in order to, and then meet these needs. That's my end game as well. So I'm happy to throw a vote if it falls where it falls, right? That's how we do things. But
Okay.
That's my hope here. That's the design in removing this grade level core curriculum.
Thank you.
I don't want to restrict teachers.
I hear you, and thank you for that. Member Davis, did you have more, or?
Yeah, I have a
Member,
question about the same.
There's no more comments now. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I just, I'm wondering, because the top line reads fine to me, because I think the adapting as appropriate, all of the content, methodology, delivery, all of that covers what Member Hymas is saying, all those scaffolding pieces that people are implementing to try, to get here. Where I think could this add the confusion, does on B2, where it says other alternate or modified academic achievement standards are prohibited, could that sort of absolute sounding language make the above line, does it feel like it negates that? I understand what it's saying. I understand it saying you can't use 2nd grade standards to teach an 8th grader. You've got to start with the standards for 8th grade and then adapt as needed to get there. But I don't know if that language makes it feel confusing or hyper restrictive, that we can't actually do what it says we can do up above in adapting as appropriate the content, the methodology, and the delivery. it's just a question. I don't know the answer to.
Leah, do you want to respond, or Laura, one of you?
Yeah, let me quickly respond. So B2, other alternate or modified academic standards is actually referring to standards, and that is prohibited by federal law. So
Okay.
a state can have alternate core standards for students with significant cognitive disabilities, which we have the essential elements in Utah. A state cannot have any other standards. So it
Okay.
is different, Vice Chair Davis. And so I think I understand Board Member Hymas a little bit better what you were talking about. And I wonder if we took the sentence apart, if a little bit on top, if it would be helpful, and maybe not. But if we just take out all of the commas and the dependent clauses, specially designed instruction means adapting as appropriate to the needs of a student who is eligible, delivery of grade level core curriculum instruction. So the specially designed instruction is adapting grade level core curriculum instruction. I don't know if that's helpful, but if you take out all the middle words, it sounds like it is saying exactly what you want, but maybe I still misunderstand.
Does that change your thinking, Matt, or help?
I think it does, Leah, and I appreciate your expertise in looking at this and helping me get there, because I think it does help a little bit. I'm trying to get clarity for teachers that they have flexibility in trying to get their kids to a specific level. And so what would that look like again, Leah? I know I don't know if you wrote that down, but
I think, go ahead, Leah, you want to try again?
If you just read the sentence, like an English teacher would, to take out, all of the extra dependent clauses. So specially designed instruction means adapting as appropriate to the needs of a student who is eligible. Delivery of grade level core content instruction. So yes, teachers who are adapting grade level core curriculum instruction are providing special ed. That's exactly what they're doing. They're exactly meeting the definition. If they are adapting the delivery of core content, they're providing specially designed instruction.
and in that sense, if they're adapting by using different curriculum, that's acceptable.
Yes, it is not prohibited.
So do you still feel like, Matt, we need to literally change those phrases, or now you understand better what that's supposed to be saying?
I just want, I need it to be clear, right? If Leah's suggesting, I don't know if we remove punctuation or if we just read it differently, right? If two people can read it differently, then that's obviously a concern. I don't know how to offer more clarity.
And let me just ask Leah then. Leah, do you think it reads better if you take out those phrases, or do you think it's better to leave the phrases in? But I don't know if you remove the commas, that feels a little hard to me, but what's your thinking in terms of?
I think if we wanted to take it apart, we would just outline it, which we can do without a motion. So specially designed instruction means, so adapting would be a little number or letter, I guess. Adapting is appropriate to the needs of the student, the content method, and then adapting. The first one would be adapting the content as appropriate to the needs of an eligible student. The next, the little 2 would be specially designed instruction, or adapting the methodology of a student who is eligible. And then the little number 3 would be adapting the delivery of the grade level. So you would put the content of the grade level core curriculum, you would put the methodology of the grade level core curriculum, and then you would put the delivery of the grade level core curriculum, so that especially designed instruction is adapting any of those, any and or all of the content, the methodology, and the delivery of grade level core curriculum.
So does that, and I don't want to belabor this too much, Matt, but does that help or hurt or not?
It helps me a little bit, but let me ask, does the phrase grade level core curriculum, I know we're going back in here, restrict the breadth of the word content that can be adapted? Does that make sense, Leah?
That, Leah, would you, to me, that it feels like that is exactly what that's why you want to leave in grade level curriculum.
That's why you want to leave it in, because
Right.
because what it is doing is allowing the teacher to consider the breadth, the depth, and the complexity of the content and adapt it as needed to the needs of the student. Breadth, depth, and complexity. Those are the three keywords when it comes to specially designed instruction. And that's what a teacher says. Here's the standards. For a student with disability, we're going to adopt the breadth, we're going to adopt the depth, and we're going to adopt the complexity, or adapt, excuse
But
me,
we're gonna
adapt
keep
all
the
of those
content.
three.
But we're
Yes.
going to keep content. Let's mull that over for a minute, Matt, and
Sure.
then we'll go to Member Booth and Member Davis, and then let's move on. Go ahead, Randy.
So I am really interested in clarity and meeting the needs of the people that are particularly dealing with these specific issues. And I think that the 300 plus pieces of feedback that we've received from those in the field that are in that position are being dealt with and have been dealt with, have been responded to. So we're kind of like the last ones coming along in terms of giving feedback. So I think it's critical that they hear what Matt, what Natalie, what Cindy, what you have to contribute, or what concerns we might have. But I also feel that I don't feel that we are in a position as a member of the board to exert any more know-how of what it really ought to be than any of those others that have been contributing even till midnight last night, when we received another 3 suggestions from one of the charter schools. And so I want us to bring our ideas up, but I think we should leave it with Laura Lee and Dr. Voorhees to consider that idea with all the other ideas, and then bring us the final, what they would finally recommend. I don't think there's a great value in us saying, if it doesn't get fixed our way, then it doesn't proceed, or it's not going to be as effective as it could be. I mean, they're dealing with it and have been dealing with it for hours and days and weeks and months. And so I want us to get our feedback out there and get some initial response, but then to dig into it and keep going on the same point. I mean, I've said enough. That's just.
I hear you. I hear what you're saying.
All right.
Cindy, do you have an additional thought?
A parent who's on our parent advisory committee for special ed just sent a text to me that said, who's watching, removing grade level complicates the efforts to include students with disabilities by allowing an entirely different curriculum. This would almost require a separate location. My son is doing inclusion at our local junior high. He gets the essential elements of core in the gen ed class, but then the IEP teams can work on how you access that. So I don't know if we can find a way to leave and help the understanding that students with disabilities, unless there's a cognitive disability as outlined in the law, deserve access to the grade level standards, with the understanding that they may be needing to use some materials that are on a variety of grade levels to scaffold to that point. However, we need to make that clear is okay with me, but I do think we need to leave the language so we don't confuse that students do have a right to access that grade level, those grade level standards.
Thank you. I'm a little bit, go ahead, Leah.
Vice Chair Davis, to that point, and I don't know if it would make it better for you, Chair Hymas. So is the sticking point the curriculum as opposed to the standards? Because you very cogently, Vice Chair Davis, just said how important it is for the students to access the standards, and changing the word curriculum, although they do not mean the same thing. The access point needs to be the standards, and curriculum helps get a student to the access point. Maybe that would be reasonable language.
In the interest of moving this somewhere, I'm going to ask Matt if he prefers this version, a potential alternate motion, to his own, and then we'll choose one and vote on it. So which is your druthers, Matt? I'm not sure how that fits into procedure, but which is your preference, Matt?
Well, can I answer Dr. Voorhees' question real quick?
Oh, sure.
For me, it's the curriculum, what we're using to get to the point. It's not that we don't want that I'm hoping that kids, or not hoping, but I don't want kids to get to their standards, right? Their grade level standards. It's the curriculum or instruction, right, that we're providing to the student. So with that in mind, if Dr. Voorhees, as she had mentioned, she said she could probably just make that change without a motion, because I don't know how much wording is we're just changing the appearance for clarity's sake.
Okay.
But Dr. Voorhees, with my answer to your question, where I'm more worried about the curriculum or instruction, does that need to change anything, any wording?
So the change between the word curriculum and standards would be substantive, because they are not the same thing. So if that is the motion you wanted to make, that the word curriculum was changed to standards, I don't see that as problematic. We would need to help LEAs understand that curriculum, the materials that get you to the standards, that's part of the instructional process, but it's the standards that is the key element that students need to access.
And that one's under federal law, you say?
Yeah, the standards, grade appropriate standards.
So if I can amend my motion then, Chair Lear, to remove the word curriculum and insert standards, that would be my motion.
Okay, and does that is that still accurate in your mind, Leah?
Yeah, they don't mean the same thing, but standards are more important than the curriculum.
Okay, I hear you. And let's take that as your motion then. So you want to go back to your original motion, Matt, is that right?
I think Angie just highlighted it right there. That's the motion.
So yes, you do want to go back to your original motion. Okay.
I've
So
amended it just a little bit.
right,
Yes.
but not the alternative broken out below. Okay. So the motion is for the committee that to change number 50, specially designed instruction needs adapting as appropriate to the needs of a student who is eligible under these rules. We wanted to get rid of the first of the eligible there. Of a student who's eligible under these rules, the content, methodology, delivery of grade level core standards instruction
Chair Lear, you actually only need to read this actual motion. This was just illustrative of what it would look like.
Oh,
So
I'm sorry.
the motion's actually either purple or pink.
Okay, so it's only that. All right,
Yeah.
let me try again. The motion is the committee strike the words curriculum and replace with standards in subsection 50 on line 19. Now, discussion to that motion. Member Davis.
I worry that we're saying that now you can adapt the standards, which I thought in the federal code was the one thing that we can't adapt. We can't adapt the standards, but we can adapt all the instruction and content to get there. So I'm wondering if we could say, if it reads the content, methodology, or delivery of curriculum in order to progress toward grade level standards or something of that nature. I mean, what would keep it legal? So we're still providing access to grade level standards, but using, perhaps you might use some other, like in math standards to get to that standard. You might adapt curriculum, but I thought we're saying we can't adapt the standards. And down below in 2, it says you can't adapt the standards.
And Leah, do you want to respond to that?
You are correct. You can't adapt the standards. What you would be adapting, the way I read it, but it's a very good question, is the standards instruction. You can't adapt the standards. You're absolutely correct.
Well,
And
standards instruction is the curriculum, isn't it? Or the methodologies?
It feels like content, methodology, and delivery are part of instruction or the
Correct.
curriculum.
Are we time bound on this? Because I feel like we could spend all day wordsmithing.
I know, that's why I'd like to either move on or
Right.
decide that we're gonna, I just feel like I agree with Randy's previous comment of that these folks have taken in 350 comments and now we're at the last minute inserting our own insight. And that's somewhat the committee's role, but I don't know that it's the best role we should play.
Well, what's the time frame?
That's-
Can we send these 4 groups of people's, to be reconsidered with the other stakeholders, or are we on a time pressure?
Would you speak to that, Leah?
No, you can certainly send it back. If you want us to address very specific things like this and reword to try to address the issues, we are not in a pressure to hold this a month.
Okay, thank you. Cindy, further? Randy, I'd like to hear Randy's comment. He's got one, so I just feel like it's always easy to kick stuff down the road, but Member Booth.
My question was, okay, so Dr. Voorhees, what does either approving or disapproving this motion, striking the word curriculum and replacing with standards, what does that do for the educator in the field? Does that clarify or confuse them more in terms of what was already there yes, so just
I got it.
You got it. Thanks.
Would
We
you
can
like to
move on
respond?
this one, Carol. I think there's good language on this one. We could move on this one and see how long the others take.
Okay. Well, okay, then to Randy's question, Leah.
So we would have to be very specific. We would have to be very specific and with LEAs that they cannot adapt standards. What they can adapt is the instruction, the content, the methodology, and the delivery of the instruction of the standards.
Okay,
I mean,
So-
that's what we would do, is we would just be very explicit that they can't adapt the standards, but they can adapt this instruction.
let me simplify the question to you. Do you think the way it was written previously under using curriculum was clearer than changing this to standards? Though the standards have modifiers, which is clearer to you for the field?
I think practically the previous version is clear because that is what they have been working under for many years.
Thank you. That's a helpful answer. Matt, this is the last comment, and then we're going to vote.
Yeah, that's fine. I guess my comment is in general I sent the amendments to everybody last second. I get it, but I'm happy to postpone and sit down with Leah and just learn more and see where we can go. So there's no pressure for me to say we have to get this done right now as well. And like Leah said, this isn't necessarily time sensitive. I just obviously I have some thoughts. I'd like to spend the time. If it's not in committee meeting, then another time. I'm happy to do it. But with that, let's vote and move on. But just so you're aware, that's my sentiment as well. I want these to be addressed.
Matt,
Thank you. Natalie?
Matt, would you consider amending this to do what you just explained? To just postpone until we've had time to
Do you want to make
work through it?
Natalie, do you want to make a substitute motion? Is that what you're saying?
I just wondered if Matt wanted to amend his own.
Well, you could make a substitute motion if you want to make a substitute motion.
I think I'd rather let Matt do it so it's worded the way he wants it worded.
Well, it's a different, what he's wanting to do is a substitute motion.
Okay,
is different than what he's asking to do here. So I mean,
Okay,
you can vote on this or a substitute motion.
Then I'll make a substitute motion. Matt, you can help me with the wording. How's that?
Well, okay.
Okay. All right. So I make a motion that we put off. I don't even know how to phrase this.
You want to just
Help
delay
me out, Matt.
discussion of these, just want to delay the discussion of the rules till the most recent comments have been discussed?
Yes.
That works.
Okay, so the substitute motion is that the committee delay the further amendments to, or further discussion of the special ed rules until the most recent comments have been discussed. Any further discussion to that?
Do we need to add something in about them rewording it for us and bringing it back to us? With these concerns that taken into account, or is that?
I think that's implicit in delay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm okay with how it is, and then I'll reach out to Dr. Voorhees if that's okay with you, and maybe we'll set up something where we can have a conversation.
Thanks. Members, please vote.
Wait,
Oh, do you have further discussion, Cindy?
yeah, I just give me a second to think about the way the motion is worded.
Special ed rule.
I just want to make sure I understand. You said we got 4 groups of feedback since we did the big feedback surveys and we made the rules and took them out to superintendents and stakeholders and got all their thumbs up on all these, correct?
Yeah, since the survey and the results since we uploaded all of these documents to backup, everything that we had received to the point that we had to upload the backup was incorporated in the backup. We've had 4 distinct pieces of feedback since we uploaded the backup.
And can I have a follow-up, Chair?
Sure, I just want to clarify, those have not been incorporated. Is that right, Leah? That's right. Okay, go ahead, Cindy.
So the other feedback was incorporated, that's in backup. And then have those new rules been taken out to stakeholder groups, superintendents association and charter association and such already? The new rules as written, or have we not yet gone through that process?
So the version of the proposed rules that you are looking at today is what was, I mean, we uploaded it last week in backup, and that's what everyone has had access to for this meeting. Superintendents, anyone has had access to, and since that point, we have received 4 more pieces of distinct feedback. Not sure
Including
I'm
Matt's.
answering your question.
I think it's also important, Leah, to note that we did take this same information to all the special ed directors as well. After that comment period, all of the documents that are in here, we walked through with them as well.
See, this is my concern. If we go in and make a bunch of changes now, and we took the product out to all the stakeholder groups to get their feedback. Now, do we have to go back to all the stakeholder groups, the special?
Yeah, let's not, we're wasting time even as we go back and forth. So I hear you, Cindy. Thank you. Randy, what's your comment?
My comment is that this sounds like a conversation we've had about 30 times this year. It doesn't matter what the subject area is. Our process is still not right. Certainly Matt, Cindy, Natalie, Randy, and Carol need to have the input, but we shouldn't have the input now after everybody else has already had all the input and they've done all this work and we've gotten all this feedback and response to all the other feedback. We should have it on the front end or someplace in there so that we're not at the last minute undoing everything that they've spent a bazillion hours putting together and taking out to get feedback from our other stakeholders in public.
Right.
So we figure out how we get this process ironed out for everything that we're doing in the board so that we don't keep coming at the last minute and then bringing in these important changes that we feel very strongly about at a point that we've already gotten all the input from all the stakeholders and they're all good.
And I agree, Randy, and especially just to insert myself when we're the least expert probably of all of these folks. Angie had a comment and then I'll come back to you, Matt.
I did just want to bring up that in general, after a legislative session, we are supposed to file updated rules with the Office of Administrative Rules related to any legislation by November or December. But last time we had a very large scale, and if we don't, technically we could be called up to the Administrative Rules Review and Oversight Committee. However, I wanted to share that. So there is a bit of a time crunch, but just as we did a couple of years ago when we had very large scale changes to the special ed manual, I communicated the delay that we were having with our rules and getting them approved due to feedback and board discussion. So there's a possibility if we don't have something filed with OAR by the December meeting. So
that again, right?
Yeah, but I think that if we review this today, November in committee and get it to the full board in December, we'd actually still be generally on time.
Thank you, Matt. Did you have anything further?
Just, I hear Randy and your concerns. I was frustrated with the process last year with some processes, but have had to accept that this is the process that it comes to us and we make recommendations. Now, I want you to, I mean, as I meet with Leah, like this is, hopefully we can sit here and go through this and come out with an agreement that works for everybody. It's not to come in and force somebody's hand. If it were, then I would say, no, we absolutely need to cover this in committee right now, right? I want to work with individuals, but yeah, my concerns, why shouldn't they be addressed, right? So anyway, I'm ready to vote, Carol.
Let's let's vote on the substitute motion, which is the committee requests the discussion of sped rules be delayed and brought back to a future committee meeting to provide staff and stakeholders an opportunity to consider proposed amendments. I hope a friendly amendment, well, never mind. That's the motion. Would committee members please vote?
Ugh. I don't want to put Leah in a bad position where she feels like, and Matt, I don't think you do this. One staff member is directing and wordsmithing all the language of the rule. That's my concern.
I get it. If it fails, then we got to look at all the other amendments. We just,
No, and we don't have time to do that anyway, so.
we don't have time, like.
Now we've delayed successfully that we don't have time to look at any of the others. So not intentionally, but successfully. The vote's 3-2 and the motion passes with members Lear and Booth in the negative. We are going to, again, change the order in order to get to the more immediate problem, and that is item 8, which is information about the teacher evaluation redesign.
Board Member Lear, sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
The 2 rules on 6 and 7 should be fairly easy. I wonder if we could skip 5, go to 6 and 7, and then end with 8.
That'd be great. We'll go to 6 then. Item 6, which is we want to just describe to us, Angie, or whoever it is that wants to describe what this.
Ben is prepared to.
Minor, go ahead. Ben Rasmussen, go ahead.
Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. Good to be with you this morning. Leah and her team asked me to propose a few amendments to R277-479. This is based on some changes made during the legislative session. These came from HB 113. Basically, though, if you scroll down a little bit, Angie, you'll see that they're basically changing the time frame. You're scrolling probably too fast because we need to go to the definitions, but let me find the exact line myself here. They're on 45. You'll see they're changing the span there, and that was one change there on lines 45 through 46. And I think there was another change on 72 is also where that is implemented, and then finally 82 through 84 just references how growth is determined in accordance with the code. So this is basically just trying to be in compliance with the changes in code. And I think Leah would probably be the one that would answer any questions you may have.
Thanks. Leah, do you have anything to add to that in terms of substance?
Yes, very short. The changes are very substantive, but they are completely based on code change. There is no change being proposed that was not outlined in the legislative session.
Thank you. That is super helpful. Any other questions from committee members, and would somebody like to make a motion?
I can do it. I move that the committee approves R277-479 draft 1 on first reading and forwards to the board for approval on second and final reading.
The motion is the committee approves R277-479 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any final discussion? Committee members, please vote. And that's unanimous. Thank you. The next item would be a repeal of a rule. Ben, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So R277-412 is the State Capital Visit Program. This program is no longer operated by the board. It's now operated by the State Capital Preservation Board. So we don't need the rule anymore. So we're just asking you to repeal it.
Great. And I will place that motion myself. The motion is the committee repeals R277-412 on first reading. Recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading. Any further discussion to that? Questions about it? Thank you. Committee members, please vote. That would be unanimous. Thank you. Thank you. We just took care of 2 items. With that, we will now move to, oops, I don't mean that. with that, we'll move to the last item on our agenda, which is a discussion of an evaluation change redesign that is in the works.
Could you tell me who made the motion on the last one?
That would be me, Carol.
Thank you.
Thanks. Angie, do you want me to go right to Jennifer, or do you want to start this out?
Right to
Okay.
Jennifer.
Jennifer Thronson, please.
Thank you. Jennifer Thronson, Director of Teaching and Learning. If I may share my screen, I have a presentation for you all. Thank you, whoever did that so quickly. I'm here with my colleague, Rachel College. So she'll be doing part of the presentation, if that's okay, Chair, and I'll do some of the presentation as we've been sharing the responsibilities and would like to share the responsibility here as well.
Perfect. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. So in preparation for this presentation, we just wanted to set you up with some background that is built to where we are. We actually started the teacher evaluation redesign process last fall when we started to advance the revisions to the Utah Effective Teaching Standards. That was the first step. We needed new standards to be able to move towards a new teacher evaluation system. Those have been completed. We'll talk about that timeline here in a moment, but some additional background that has happened since then are things such as the legislative audit that had occurred around teacher evaluation that was released in the winter of 2022. Then we had an education interim discussion in which they opened a bill file based on the results of that audit, saying we would like, to change teacher evaluation given the findings. And then in the August 2022 board meeting, the full board approved us working with the legislators to make changes to teacher evaluation code. And then we are being asked to attend November 2022 education interim to present the code amendments we would recommend, and are here today to present information related to that item so that you are well informed and can ask any questions that might be necessary. In terms of the primary focus for this work, there are really two primary foci. One would be public schools, after all, are public institutions offering with public funds. And so as we think about, we need to meet our fulfillment to the public by having quality educators. So that's one focus for this work. The second focus, and really to me the most important, is advancing student learning. With quality educators, we have a better chance of maximizing student learning in our classrooms. And so this new model will really promote continuous growth and professional learning for our educators to continue to grow their skill sets so that they can better serve their students. Teaching, as you know, is a very complex job and really takes a lot of continuous ongoing learning to be the best that we can be and to keep up with the research changes and those pieces. And so that's the focus of this teacher evaluation redesign, is really advancing student learning so that the public can have confidence in the quality educators that are serving their students. So with that said, our presentation today will focus on providing a timeline of how this work has been conducted over the last year or more, the purpose that has been defined by the educator teacher evaluation working group based on focus group feedback, and then the process that we're going through and have been going through. Rachel will provide that information, and then I'll provide a summary of the key components of what the redesign is shaping up to be, and take any questions at that point. So with that said, Rachel, I'll hand things off to you with the timeline.
Thank you so much. Rachel College, Educational Leadership Specialist at the Utah State Board of Education. This is our overall timeline inclusive of the education evaluation redesign, as well as the Utah Educational Teaching Standards and their approval that happened in August, and how they are working together. So you'll, it's just our overview of when we've started and when we anticipate being able to complete this work. And so we'll go into a little bit more detail with that piece in a minute.
Rachel, you're breaking up a little.
We wanted to start off with. I'm breaking up a little bit. Oh,
yeah.
No. Okay. Maybe what I'll try is I'll try to I'll turn off my video. Maybe that will help, and then you'll be able to hear me. Okay.
Yes.
Is that better?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. Right. So what we did is we initially had focus groups, and with the focus groups, we asked 4 questions. One was, what makes feedback effective? What is the purpose of teacher evaluation? What might the future look like to achieve this purpose? And what are the best and worst parts of the current system? So we had focus groups inclusive of stakeholders throughout the state to share their insights related to these 4 questions. And then from that group, we were able to compose a redesign working group. And in the redesign working group, we've got, we have teachers, we have school and LEA leaders, we have representatives from higher education and from teacher union. And this group has been working together to look at the actual redesign work, to take in that information from the stakeholders who were part of those focus groups, to then define what we see as the purpose of evaluation. And so this purpose statement is been defined as teacher evaluation provides ongoing feedback that grows teacher practice, builds reflective practitioners, and increases student learning. And from there, once we had this purpose statement defined, we were able to then have our redesign group examine research on teacher evaluation, investigate best practices happening in teacher evaluation locally, then incorporate some focus group feedback and gather more stakeholder input. So we've been able to do quite a bit in this amount of time, where we've been able to then have the redesign proposal draft 1 launch in July to receive feedback from the field. And we were able to gather feedback and then in August, refine that initial proposal draft. To then moving to September, we released it again with the revisions from the initial feedback. And then now in October, we're refining it to, from that feedback we received from the field. And then looking forward, we're also currently working on amending code and continuing to get feedback on those code drafts. And then we anticipate that in January through March of the following year, next year, we'll seek that legislative approval of this amended code. And then with the idea that we'll have a 2-year phase in to allow LEAs time to be able to phase in the new evaluation system within their specific LEAs. I'll turn it back over to Jennifer.
Thank you. So that's kind of just timeline process for product. And now is kind of hitting the key components for what teacher evaluation would look like moving forward. So really looking at separating teacher performance and teacher conduct. So specifically in the teacher performance side of this work, the focus would be on really teacher growth and ongoing feedback and maximizing student learning. So to achieve those things, our teachers would go through a self-assessment process in which they would look at the Utah Effective Teaching Standards, which have less than 25 standards, and identify those standards that they feel like they could use more opportunity to grow in their profession in. Once they do that self-assessment, then they would create 2 to 3 goals through educator driven, like they're going to make those choices in collaboration with their supervisor based on their self-assessment and where they need to grow and what's happening in their school community and the students that they're serving. And then those goals will be determined, like what would success look like? What are the evidence that you'll provide? So it's really clear upfront between the supervisor and the teacher what their goals are, what they'll be looking for when they interact with that teacher, whether that's in classroom observations, professional learning communities, or other settings, and being able to really understand what the outcome will be at the end, including the use of formative assessments. There will also be feedback whenever teachers are observed, whether that's in informal, like professional learning communities or classroom observations or video submissions of classroom instruction, so on. It's kind of a big list. They would be provided feedback in a timely, specific way so that there's an opportunity for the teacher and the supervisor to have conversations about what occurred, what their feelings are about that, and how they might continue to be supported and growing in that area. And there's a reflection component. In the reflection component, teachers that they once they've achieved that goal, which might be at the middle of the year, might be at the end of the year, and they would produce the evidence of their reflection of student learning and their professional growth. And that's through artifacts that they would collect from student work samples, formative assessments that they've built, or other resources that they have to demonstrate that evidence of student learning, as well as the evidence of their personal learning along the year. So with that said, those are the 4 main components. Reflection is a huge piece of this along the way to really have our teachers having that opportunity, as well as reciprocal feedback. We're really moving towards a coaching atmosphere from our supervisors around how do you think that went? What supports do you need? And being able to give more directive as needed. if they see opportunities for growth that the teacher maybe isn't noticing. So that's the way that this would be structured, is really around goal setting with self-assessment and reflection and evidence of student learning being impacted because of the changes that they've made in their practice. And then finally, a major theme that came out of the focus groups and continued through the working group was a need to disentangle teacher dismissal and termination from teacher evaluation, and to really separate teacher performance from teacher conduct. So in the code amendments that will be proposed in interim in November, the intent is to say, when you're going to dismiss or fire a teacher, it's because of the 4 things that are already in code, and taking away this evaluation element. So specifically, code has a violation of work policies, a violation of school board policies, state board rules or laws, a violation of standards of ethical, moral, or professional conduct, or insubordination. So those are the reasons a teacher could be dismissed from their profession, and they no longer would be tied to evaluation being a potential dismissal. As you know, we have less than 1% of teachers that are designated as not effective in our current teacher evaluation system. The use of teacher evaluation for dismissal has been one that hasn't been very effective for numerous reasons. And so the community really wanted to see these be disentangled from each other and focus on this conduct piece around, if you're not achieving your goals, there's still a way to support you. But if it's a goal that the principal has for you and you're not showing any achievement towards it, the supervisor can become more directive and say, I need you to do these things. And now it moves into insubordination if a teacher chooses not to do those things. So there's still an opportunity for supervisors to hold teachers accountable, but it's through the conduct lens. So that is what we have for you in terms of just an overview. This is an information item, so happy to take your feedback. And we will be on deck for Education Interim in November to present the amended code drafts that we are working on concurrently.
Not seeing any hands for the moment. You pretty much answered. I have a question related to your last comment, Jennifer, if that's okay. And you kind of answered it because, and I've talked to you briefly about this before, but it sounds like now what I'm worried about, and I don't want this to sound negative to our teachers at all, but I'm concerned that there isn't a clear path to either discipline a teacher for ineptitude. That's my lack of competence. I mean, you could say it a number of different ways. And did all of the stakeholders, let me sort of take it away from you and me and say, did all of the stakeholders that you worked with, were they satisfied that there would be an adequate way to assess competency without that stick, so to speak?
Absolutely, it's a great question. And what we convened some superintendents, HR directors, union representation, and others to have some of the really specific job disentanglement, as well as the survey feedback that we collected. It was a strong indicator. As we spoke with those HR directors and those superintendents, I think the superintendent Morgan was the most articulate. He's like, we don't use teacher evaluation for this purpose. When we dismiss a teacher, it is for one of those 4 reasons, and that has been sufficient for our purpose. The union attorney was like, yes, we don't have issues with when you dismiss a teacher. They're not coming to us because it was of a inadequate due process or those kinds of things, because it really is when a teacher is not demonstrating competence, you're going to move towards more directive actions, such as I am going to require you to submit your lesson plans to me weekly. And when teachers fail to do things like that, you now can call them an insubordination around conduct, which then leads to dismissal potentially. So that's how they felt like this was able to be done. The Canyons HR director expressed like they have 6 to 8 teachers a year that end up in that remediation place, and honestly only end up terminating 1 to 2 of those. Either the other ones leave on their own accord, or they are able to successfully do their plan of assistance. And so the commonality thread from those stakeholders was we already have sufficient resources through teacher conduct, that we don't need teacher evaluation kind of entangled with that, but truly separating them was the intent that they desired.
You're kind of sort of convincing me. I'm just, as I've expressed before, and I'll just use this brief follow-up and then go to other comments, but as I've expressed before to you, I'm afraid when this gets to the legislature, there will be legislators who are not satisfied with this. And that, as I've said to you before, the cure could be worse than the disease. I'm worried that because of that concern from those who are not intimately involved in the classroom process from day to day, that it'll turn into something more draconian than what we have. That would be, I think, a really unfortunate outcome in these stressful times. So that's just my caution, my concern. It's not even a caution, it's just a concern. Randy, member Booth.
I appreciated the additional lens of student learning that you refocused your comments to after our little discussion in our prep meeting. I think that's a critical issue, and what Chair Lear brings up as you're looking to present in November at the interim committee, I think that our redesign doesn't ignore the big stick that we need to take care of some of those teachers out there that are just not doing the job. But our redesign, especially coming out of COVID, we've found more effective ways to deal with those concerns as we focus our major attention on highly qualified, prepared teachers who are advancing student learning. That's our major focus. And for those teachers who require a plan to improve whatever it is that they're not doing, we're handling it through this. You know, we show parallel roads going happening simultaneously to take care of the issues that certainly the legislators and parents out there who would love to do everything they could possibly do to dethrone. We've never been on a throne in recent, but whatever.
A low bar.
Yeah, to throw us off track even more than we're already suffering in public education. We are not in pleasant and welcoming times. So being very forthright, not being too Pollyanna, and recognizing that, okay, yeah, we got problems, and we have excellent leaders of learning who are dealing with those problems in this way simultaneously as we focus our greatest effort in terms of teacher evaluation on what it is that everybody wants us to do, and that is provide the very best learning experience possible for children. And that's our focus. We're taking our cues from you, the legislature, because you want us to provide what you say. Well, we don't want to quote them. What they and other parent groups are saying is so horrible about public education, so that we should go to vouchers and everything else for the rest of our time, eternity, because that's the only way to solve all of the horrible problems that are going on. There's a lot of good stuff going on, and we're focusing on those good things, and simultaneously we're taking care of the problems, and you're going to be happy.
So I hear that you kind of like this direction. Is that true?
Yeah.
The short version. Okay, thank you. Thanks for that comment. Matt?
Yeah, Dr. Thronson, when will we see the code changes prior to interim? Do you have a answer for that one? Do you know when that will be?
Jennifer?
Yes, if the committee would like, we can bring those in the November committee. It won't make it to full board before interim, but at least you all could have some preview of what that looks like. We'll have, I would imagine, a draft by the time committee happens. I can't guarantee it, as we're not the ones actually drafting it. We're just sending our edits. Angie, maybe you could add, because this is where I'm like, I have to bless and release it to someone else's responsibility.
Yeah, what we could do is we could share with the legislative staff that the board would appreciate a preview of the draft before, but they'll also need to get a approval from the chairs of the committee to share that draft, because if we share it with you all, that essentially makes it a public document. But what we could do, if that is not doable for whatever reason, Jennifer has mocked it up like as a Word document of sorts, where it shows the edits from our, like, it's our drafting instructions to give to the drafter, if that makes sense. It's still in process, but if we couldn't get the draft bill from the legislature, maybe we could share it's like, it would be like a Word or a PDF document that shows our recommendations, if that makes sense. So I think we could do one of the two.
Thanks. Matt, further?
No, I think, information is always helpful. So whatever you can share with us, we appreciate, I'm sure.
Right, agreed. I don't see any other hands raised. I think what I hear is cautious optimism. So probably, I know I would like to see a little more detail, and I think that's what everybody's going to be interested next is, so what will this look like? And the other interesting piece to me will be to see, I don't want this to be, I don't want a document that goes in even more in a direction toward purely helping teachers and evaluating their strengths and weaknesses, but then have LEAs sort of desperate, and so they use an even less effective document for some kind of disciplinary reasons. That again, if I'm reaching, that makes me a little nervous too. I don't see any other hands raised, so I think we're good, and we're looking for more information to come.
Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thank you. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks for the helpful PowerPoint too. If you have any other action, then I think we're finished, unless, Angie, am I missing something on the agenda?
Board Member Davis, did you have anything?
No, I was just asking. I didn't realize that we've had a senator asking why our special ed rules aren't done, why it's taking us so long. So I don't know. I'm feeling a pinch, and I'm just sitting here trying to decide if we go back and what we do. Do we say we change the postponement, move it to the full board, get all the issues worked out, get the language of the amendments the way you want it, bring them to the full board in November, or take a chance that they go back and get worked on, come back to committee, we do whatever we're going to do, they may come anyway to the full board. So and we have to have this done in December.
Can we schedule another meeting, just a separate meeting just for this, for the special ed rule?
I don't know. I guess I'm just asking what people.
You guys aren't quite as busy as I am right now. This is a super busy point in time for me. So that would be hard for me to have a special meeting, but I would make it so if we needed to. Your desire then, Cindy? Nothing or something?
Feedback. I'm just asking for feedback.
How many more amendments?
If it goes to the full board in November, then it would give us, if it didn't pass, one more month, I guess, in December. I don't know. I don't know what the best thing is timeline.
Well, I'm fearful if
but we're getting pressure on the time.
if it went past December, we'll have all new committees.
It can't go past December because we're bound by law.
That's my point. So it has to be done, well, unless we get a dispensation. But it would be super hard to do by, if we don't do it by December and get a dispensation, it would take a couple more months probably. Matt, how many additional amendments did you have after that one?
After the one, there were 3 and a couple of recommendations, but honestly, knowing how the processes work, if you threw a motion out and it went to full board, then I would still reach out to Leah and see if I could make some changes, right? I mean,
And bring them to the full board.
right, that's just how things work. No, I don't want to be silenced, right? I don't want to be squashed by time, but if that's what
No one's, and
needs
no
to
one,
happen,
no one wants that. I'm just, we're dealing with 2 really important issues, and one of them is committee feedback and one of them is timing. And so we're trying to balance the 2. Angie.
Just wanted to give you another option, which would be to reconsider your action and continue the discussion of the amendments until 12:30, and then incorporate whichever of those amendments you can by 12:30, and then forward it to the board, and then you could have the discussion there. I think what Board Member Davis's point is, if we have it go to the full board in November, it would give the board 2 potential months. If you have it come to committee next month, you're really forcing the board one discussion of it, which could work as well. So that's an option.
If you wanted to make that, or Matt, if you wanted to make that motion, Cindy, the other thing I'm thinking is any of these amendments that we can process would make Matt's work that much easier with Leah between now and the next board meeting. Matt?
I think this first motion, obviously, I need to spend more time on. So I think that the second motion that I have, just removing or replacing one word,
Okay.
might go a little bit quicker. We might be able to get that out of the way.
Well,
If
first
that's
we need to reconsider our previous action.
And do I get to do, if I was
You could do that, yes, because you voted. No, I voted, let me think. I voted, it'd have to be, yes, it'd have to be one of you. Oh, no, it would have to be
Yes.
one of us. who
No,
voted.
Board Member Hymas, somebody on the prevailing side. So Hymas.
Oh, that's right.
Davis were
Okay.
fine.
Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
I believe it's I move that the committee reconsider the committee's action on item 2.4 to delay discussion of the special education rules to a future meeting.
Thank you. The motion is that the committee reconsider the action taken on item 2.4 to delay. All those in favor of reconsideration, please vote. Now, all of those, everyone please vote, not just those. I think we're all unanimously in favor of reconsideration. So reconsideration is in front of us. Go ahead, Member Hymas.
Okay, I'd like to move, where are we at here? I'm sorry. Okay, I move that the committee remove using and add LEAs may benefit from on page 76, subsection 3.p. And do we still have Dr. Voorhees on?
Laura Lee's here.
Yes, I'm
we
here.
do.
I'm
Go
here,
ahead.
Chair.
Leah, go ahead. Are you going to respond to that?
Well, it would be helpful if I could speak just a second to the
Oh,
motion to give Leah
please.
some context.
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt. Go ahead.
Thank you. I worry that if we have this term using USB technical assistance, resources and evidence-based practices, that we are telling LEAs that they have to use these things. And so I know that LEAs may benefit from using these things. Is it just that slight word change? What does that do, Dr. Voorhees, to our document here?
Dr. Voorhees.
I don't think there's a problem with changing those words.
Does this give it?
LEAs
does this
must
give it
develop
flexibility?
inclusionary practices, and they can choose to use our documents or not.
Okay, that's what using made it sound like they had to use these specific documents, but they don't.
Member Davis. Thanks, Matt. And take your little check off there.
So can that fire, can it just stand in that order, or do we have to put it at the end that may benefit at the end, because the evidence-based practices, don't they have to use that? The evidence-based practices, or are all of those things optional? Let's put whatever's optional at the end and whatever's required at the beginning. Of the sentence.
Yeah.
Ask Leah, would it be saying using evidence-based practices right there? I don't know if you can see.
The
it.
evidence-based practices are, yeah, the federal law requires evidence-based
So can
practices.
we start with that? You want to lead with that? That's your point. Cindy, is that what she's saying?
I think that works the way you just did it.
Just organize them so we know what's required and what's a benefit.
Okay. I see what you're thinking. I thought you meant, okay.
I believe that's a friendly amendment, if that's what's
Okay.
happening here.
That is what was being proposed. So it would be, oh my gosh, I'm getting dizzy. Go ahead.
Give me one moment. I'm just
All right, you're great. You're just so fast. I'm getting dizzy. While you're doing that, Randy, do you want to speak to that too?
Yes, thank you. I'm happy that this also is one of the proposals from a charter school that responded last night, exactly the same issue. And I think this actually, what Cindy has just suggested with the moving, what did we just move anyway? Whatever it was, we just moved up there at the tail, evidence-based practices, and then leaving the others as they may benefit from the assistance and resources is an improvement on what was being recommended by the charter school, but it accomplishes the same thing.
I agree. I really like this.
Can I add, and Chair, can I add one more word that
Yes.
might help? Just put other in front of resources. So it's not necessarily directed at USBE
That's
resources if there are others out there.
And that doesn't change your opinion, Leah? Okay, so the motion is now, having been quickly worked on, that the committee reword page 76, subsection Roman numeral P as follows: inclusionary practices provide a full educational opportunity from the CFR. The LEA must develop inclusionary practices that include the components in the definition using evidence-based practices. LEAs may benefit from USB technical assistance and other resources. Any questions, final comments to that motion?
Just point of order, did Matt read it, his amendment already, or are you reading it and does he need to say so?
Oh, I'm sorry. I did not. Matt,
You can just say so moved.
do you agree with the way that's worded now, Matt?
I do. Thank you.
So that's a so moved.
So moved. Yes.
Would the committee members please vote on that amendment, please? And I see 5 green marks. Thank you. That work is done. Another amendment, Mr. Hymas?
I will try to be quick here. I'd like to go to, in response to perhaps some feedback today from one of our LEAs. And if we don't have time, I get it, you'll have to let me know. But if we jump down to page 74, I move to remove section 2B, all of B, which is on page 274. Well, I don't know if the page number is going to help us at all. This is the subsection, what was it, X.U?
Oh, you need to go down. UV. Okay, and you want to remove which of these subsections now, Matt?
Just the entire section of B, and I see that it's already in there. This is not new, but as we heard today, and I'm sure there are others, this is what was the word, ambiguous. And so I don't know, this was on an original motion before our public speaker, our public comment today, and as asking to be removed as well.
Okay, so this is, can we go back to the section so we can see what it looks like without it, Angie? And then I'd like Leah to respond to that.
Chair, this particular language comes directly from an OSIP guidance document on allowable costs.
And so given that it's OSEP guidance, how strong is that message? And do you feel like it's important? And what have you heard from other stakeholders?
I do feel it is important because OSEP guidance is considered in due process hearing decisions and in complaint investigations. So when a complaint is filed, when a due process hearing is filed, the investigator, the hearing officer will reference OSEP guidance in their decision. So I do think that it is worth being explicit for LEAs and our stakeholders that this language, which is why it was originally put in, however long ago it was put in, because it is referenced in complaints and hearing decisions.
Okay, I can ask for a friendly amendment that we change the there, which is ungrammatical, to the student's IEP. If you're okay about that. Matt, I'm sure that part's friendly.
Yeah, yeah, I don't have a problem with. Is there any way, Leah, that like how do we make this more clear, or how do we? I mean, is this just something that LEAs just have to ignore until something comes up, or you know what I mean? Like it's obviously unclear for at least a few of our LEAs.
So is there a different way to say it? Is what he's saying that would say the same thing? I know you. It sounds like you've taken it directly from the OSEP guidance, which in and of itself might be ambiguous. I don't know if I'd use the word ambiguous. I can see why it's a little unclear. I mean, to the extent that's different than ambiguous. I think what I'm saying is I'm not quite sure what it means.
If the individual is providing services to a student with a disability and another student needs that same service, or that is sitting by the student, is in that same group of students, you're not taking an additional time to include other students in that work.
Okay, now I thought that's what it was, so thank you. Cindy?
Yes, I'm just making sure I understand it too. So if you're asked to do something for a general ed student, it's not going to take more time than what it would take for you to do that for the special ed student. Is that?
If you're close. If you're already doing it for the special ed student, including a general ed student is not going to take you more time.
Oh, got it. That makes more sense. Okay.
The task will not require additional time beyond the, what about, let me just think out loud.
Oh, sorry. Theoretically, if you're like running a group and there's not a person with an IEP in the group, that would be not allowable.
Yeah, because you're not addressing the needs of at least one student with a disability.
That makes more sense. Thank you.
Is there an instance where the special ed teacher or instructor is teaching a group of students, and like the gen ed student it's a mixed class, where they would need to stop before getting to the end? Like is there a concern there, right? Because in my notes I put, when would it ever be appropriate to place any child in a learning group where the intention is to not spend any time serving them? Right? If a provider is unable to take any time with a non-disabled student in a group, how are they to ensure they can provide a benefit to them?
Is that a question for someone?
Well, yeah, Dr. Voorhees, I know you're the expert on this. I'm just, like I said, just putting some thoughts and notes out there.
I think I know what you're saying, Matt, but what about if it said this, Leah? If we're talking, I think, Matt, you might be asking for something that's beyond explaining the ambiguity. You're asking for something different than what this really says, which is different than saying it's ambiguous.
Okay.
And which maybe you're right, but I'm just saying it's not an ambiguous issue. It means you want something else. Because I can cure the ambiguity, I think. The task does not require additional time beyond the time required to serve the student with the one student with a disability as outlined in the student's IEP. To me, that's clear. That still may not be what you want, Matt, but is that clear?
Well, let me kind of get to what I do want. And this is where my general concern came up for this.
Bag that in. Go ahead.
Is the documentation that schools have had. We've sat in a couple meetings or a few, at least a couple, where we've asked for documentation. The schools have given documentation and we've said that's not right. And so I guess what I'm asking for is clarity. And that was in my recommendations that I sent
this morning
to a few people, that we really lay out what we're looking for here. So it's clear. So, and I think that would take care of this as well. If they had something that said, yeah, you can use funds for this, but you can't in this scenario, right? Does that make sense?
So you would like a guidance document that was examples and non-examples?
That would be quite large, if you know what I mean. I know in my
I thought that was a different amendment, actually, Matt, but okay.
Well, it wasn't an amendment, it was a recommendation.
Right.
Oh, and there it is right there, right? Allowable costs. So Leah, I don't know if these things are possible, right? And I think that would help kind of with people saying, okay, I can't pay a sped teacher to do this, right? But I can pay him to do this, or this. Does that make sense? That's why I'm just trying to offer more clarity to our LEAs so that we don't have to sit here and say, well, that's the right documentation, that's not, and then send it back and go back and forth. I'd rather have something where they can just look at it and say, this is what the USBE is looking for. This is what we're going to keep. If they don't have it, they don't have it. If they do have it, we don't have to have any conversation on it.
Is that, and that's a recommendation, different than amending this particular phrase.
Right.
So are we leaving this one alone for a minute? Is that what you're saying, Matt?
Yeah, I think so. If we, and I don't know what we have time for, maybe I just make a motion. Maybe I withdraw Amendment 5 for now, and I can discuss that later, and move that the committee directs staff to develop specific documentation requirements for each allowable cost in the allowable cost table, including 1, the allowable cost, 2, the required documents to support the cost, 3, a checklist of required elements for each required document, and 4, a model document.
And Cindy, will go ahead.
I just wonder if we can get some feedback on that. I think we do have some model documents on our website already. I'm not sure, do we have some of these other things? I do think it's helpful to see examples sometimes. Would there be any unintended consequence by providing examples? Then by doing this, would it become too narrow of interpretations out there? Or would something like this be helpful to folks that are trying to navigate all of this? Could we hear from Dr. Voorhees what we already have and what could be helpful?
Right, Dr. Voorhees.
So in the rules, there in the section, I think it's T, but there is a documentation, there's a chart that has already been in the rules. It's not new.
I remember.
So this is the allowable cost chart, and I assume, Board Member Hymas, this is what you're talking about, that you would want us to develop a document that went line by line for each of these with what the form would look like to say, yes, you did this, or no, you didn't do this. And an example.
Yeah, if we had something that said, this is what we're looking, this is documentation, for example, this is documentation we're looking on for function code 810. Right. And I get that it'll take some time, but it's going to be helpful in the long run. I mean, I know that it's work, right? I know it is. But again, we've had at least two where I've sat on the last 2 years where schools have come forward and said, I don't know what you want. Right. And I saw this in charter school board meetings as well. I don't know what you want. And then they're saying, tell me what you want. And then the board goes back and says, well, this is what we want. And so they send something else. And it's like, that's still not right. There's got to be some clarity to our LEAs. And this, I get that we have this, but from what I'm experiencing, it's not enough.
And oh, go ahead, Cindy.
Yeah, I didn't realize my hand was still up. I'm just trying to figure out if my question is really would that be superfluous to what we already have? And if we already have it, is it in a format that maybe isn't as user-friendly as it could be? I mean,
could I recommend something, Board Member Davis,
Yes.
Chair Lear?
Go ahead, please.
Okay, Angie, if you can turn to page 274 in the rules, if you can move down to page or up, I don't know, see what page you're on, but page 274. Section XV, as in victory, is correlation of fiscal reports and LEA monitoring. This table here shows here you go, exactly. Shows all the different types, not to the level that Board Member Hymas is talking about, the program code or the fund code, but all the different types, the groups of costs. Okay, we've grouped all the costs into contracts, IEPs, okay. And the document type, the type of document that could be requested for monitoring, and then the rationale for that. So this is already here. This isn't new, right? So it is what you are requesting, Board Member Hymas, that maybe we take this chart and create a model form for each one of these categories. Is that, because this is already outlines the documentation that we expect for all of those. And we put this in, you put this in the last time we updated the rules as a result of concerns about monitoring and having accurate documentation. So this chart is 2.5 years old.
Is this similar to what you want? They're talking about, Matt, requesting? Is it the same? Is it part of it?
It's similar. As an initial look, the thought is, though, if it's 2.5 years old and I've only been on the board for 2 years, a little under 2 years, and there's some confusion. Why? I mean, is it on the LEA that it's confusing? Do you know what I mean? Like, why is there still confusion with required documentation?
Can I offer another perspective, having worked in this area, sometimes as a hearing officer, also with LEAs, on some special ed issues? I sometimes think, I have two thoughts about this. One, sometimes it can get so specific. These kinds of charts can be so specific that they're not helpful, but they're hurtful, because you can't possibly list every possibility that might be satisfactory. And so we're still left with some uncertainty, either on the LEA's part or on the SEA's part. That's one concern. The second concern is sometimes I've found LEAs of all varieties that receive this kind of document, and it's not that it's ambiguous in air quotes, or it's not clear, but the LEA wants it to be something else. And so the complaint is not, I don't like it, but it's not clear. So sometimes, and I don't mean that as a criticism or as to be dismissive, but I think sometimes the person looking at this has to look at it in a broader context too, with an open mind. And I hesitate at having our staff create something as labor intensive as you're describing, and fearful that it still won't solve the problem.
Well, can I ask a question? Sorry.
Yes.
Hand up. Is the question about format, Member Hymas? Like, some of these you can't format because they're face-to-face or by phone documentation, but would it be helpful to see kind of like a format of these others that do have written documentation requirement, like a sample model of what I'm assuming most of our LEAs are turning all these in fine, but would it be helpful to have a sample put in for each of the written ones so all the LEAs or new LEAs could see, oh, this is what that would look like?
I think
Tangible.
if we look at the original recommendations, we need something with allowable costs, right? Because we've already debated here. I know we've debated in the past, like, what does that look like, right? So what can be done here? Who can I pay for this, right? Because it's clear that classes combine special ed and gen ed students. And so that's when allowable cost gets tricky. So that's, again, the allowable cost, I think, is as specific as it can be, right? The required documents that support that cost. So what are we looking for as board members when we make a decision if that was an allowable cost or not, right? Is there a document that says this is exactly what we're looking for? And then, like I said, a checklist of required elements for each required document. And that might fall within the document, right? Like it might be within the document itself or the documentation, and then a model document. So I don't know how many that is, or how much work that is, or if it's already done and we just need to make it more clear. That's where I would defer back to the expert here, Dr. Voorhees, and her team, of saying, yeah, we might have this, but where is it? What does it look like? And it's not what's on our screen right now. It's not but it does give us some better clarity.
So you're not wedded to it being in the rules, but you would like it to be available. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, yes, and the rule might refer to it, but it's just something to help our LEAs.
Is that something? We've got about 1.5 minutes. So we'll get an answer to Cindy. Go ahead, and then I'll have an answer from Leah. Is this something that's doable with the staff she has? Go ahead, Cindy.
I just wonder if Member Hymas would be willing to amend his motion to have Dr. Voorhees and CAE Davis work together on, what are the kinds of documentations that they're looking for legally when they go out? How could it be streamlined to help our LEAs have better internal controls and help us to get kind of consistency of what we're looking for? But maybe we could hear from Member Hymas if that sounds appropriate, and Dr. Voorhees also.
And Matt, is that something that you would be comfortable with making it a joint effort between audit and special ed?
Yes, I believe that would be helpful to all of our LEAs. Absolutely.
Great. And is that doable with the staff you have, Leah, and the time you have?
I'm happy to work with Debbie Davis. I think specific documentation requirements for each allowable cost in the allowable cost table is a pretty huge undertaking.
But, and would you, I don't know if we are in the moment can amend exactly what you want, Matt, but in the spirit of discussion, would you at least be willing to pass this or consider this motion and then work with Leah, or maybe we don't pass the motion, but you would work with Leah to see how much of this is literally doable and how much we could get close to. That's
I'm happy with that. I want to get the ball rolling, right? Whatever we can do to get things moving.
okay. So the motion is now, Matt, if you're okay about this, and I'll let you speak to it. Look at the motion and see if you're comfortable with that in lieu of your motion 4.
Let me, I don't know what in section 10.5 is that's on the document. I don't have it up.
I think it was what we were just looking at.
Oh, okay. So, all right, will you jump back, Angie? I'm sorry. The committee directs special.
While he's reading
Document.
that, Chair, can I ask a question?
Yes.
I'm assuming this wouldn't necessarily be in the SPED rules, but it would be like a guidance document. Am I understanding that right? So it's not so time bound to this. They could work on all this and kind of use it as a guidance document. Am I understanding that?
That's what I was asking. Go ahead, Leah.
Or Matt?
Yeah, I don't think it's not going to be in the rule yet. If there's something amazing that short answer, no, it's not. I'm not looking to incorporate it into rule right now.
Okay.
Let me just check on this motion for a second. I'm not necessarily trying to limit it to that section. If allowable costs are not in there, if they're in there, then great, let's keep it. If they're not, then let's remove just that part.
So one of your prime directive is allowable costs. Is that
Yeah,
accurate?
I want LEAs to know what they can and can't do with the money. Perfect. Well, not perfect. You got to spell it right. Thank you. You got it.
Okay. So is that your motion, Matt?
Let me read it for you. Is that okay?
Yes.
I move that the committee direct special education and internal audit staff to develop model documentation forms or samples for the document types described in section 10.5 and for allowable costs.
The motion is the committee directs special ed and internal audit staff to develop model documentation forms or samples for the document types described in section 15 and for allowable costs.
They're actually not Roman numerals, they're numbers. It's XV, but that doesn't, I don't think it matters to the motion.
Okay, XV, it's hard to know.
Okay.
Thank you. XV and for allowable costs to be accurate with the motion. Discussion to that, Cindy?
I did not ask her permission, but I just got this text from CAE Davis, who's listening to this conversation. And she said, USBE and LEAs need to consider the compliance objectives that must be achieved, or the barriers or what stands in the way of achievement of objectives. Then develop the policies, procedures with forms and documentations that are necessary. Given the system some LEAs are using, I don't think it's prudent for USBE to be overly prescriptive. So I think with understanding a bit of feedback from her, I think it sounds like maybe what they would work on, and Board Member Hymas, would this fit with what you're doing, is really think through what the objectives are first, and then and look at what documentation would be helpful to achieve those objectives within the documentation of allowable costs. Does that kind of sound, because we've kind of just encumbered Debbie and I just want to give her a minute to give a little voice to the feedback there. Does that sound appropriate, Member Hymas?
Yes. I don't know what that motion looks like, but
My concerns were similar to what Debbie expressed. Randy?
So what is the status quo? What form what document does someone use, does an LEA use now that is problematic, that's causing people to not know what to do and not know what to provide? Can't there just be a simple document that makes it easy for the LEA to provide the information they need to provide as they're applying for permission to do whatever it is they need to do?
Can you speak to that, Leah?
So I don't know that I am the best person to speak to that. I think the business administrators would be better to speak to that, but the lion's share, the vast majority of LEAs have documentation that is meeting expectations.
So out of 140 LEAs, we have 135 that are meeting expectations. Is that what you're saying? The
Yeah,
numbers.
generally speaking, I mean, every time monitoring happens, monitoring is a continuous improvement process, right? When we get monitored from the feds, when we monitor LEAs, we always find ways that they can improve. We always find internal controls that need to be strengthened or developed. But and to Board Member Hymas's point, in the last few years, we have identified a couple LEAs who didn't have internal controls in place or strong enough internal controls in place. But the majority of LEAs do have internal controls in place, and the monitoring process is to help them reflect on those processes and shore them up and improve them and ensure compliance. But Board Member Booth, your question is, what's the status quo, right? And I think the status quo is that the majority of LEAs do have policies, procedures, processes, and systems in place to allowably facilitate their special education programs.
So a quick follow-up, Chair.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So wouldn't we want to allow local control and allow the local LEAs that are already doing everything fine and that are happy to continue doing that, rather than imposing some new list of all the ways that they need to jump through the hoops to do what they're already doing? I mean, I know that's what Matt wants. So why are we developing new?
With changing the word to model. I think because he changed it from specific to model. So this would be kind of like a guide to help maybe new LEAs that come on board or things like that, to kind of see examples or models of what would be helpful. And Debbie did just text me and say she's willing to help consult on it if the committee wants to move forward.
Okay, those are both good points. Matt, does this change your thinking at all in hearing these comments?
It's always helpful. And I still think if we move forward as the motion as is, that we can work together, get some clarity out to LEAs. It doesn't have to, like we said, it's not going to cover every little detail, but some clarity would be helpful. So I'm fine to move forward with a vote on this motion.
Like Debbie's on, if we wanted her to speak to it.
We also have to end this meeting.
Yeah, we need to end. Let me just, as a member of the committee, I would totally 115% support this motion, Matt, if it said to consider, and or a stronger word than that, but not an absolute mandate until we really look at the work that it would entail. That is it really necessary? And it gives me pause to hear Leah remind us that somehow 110 of these LEAs are doing it just fine, and this huge amount of work would take place for a very small number. So that gives me pause. So that I'm would you accept a consider development of, or a, if you can think of a stronger word in the moment, but we do have to vote on this motion and end. So
Yeah,
don't-
I'm fine. Like I said, I want to get the ball moving.
okay.
So
Then I
let's-
can support that with consider. I just don't want to mandate something that we might find is undoable or unproductive.
Okay.
So.
Or
thank you.
unwanted.
Thank you for that. So the motion is, if you'd like to read that, Matt.
I move that the committee directs special education and internal audit staff to consider development of model documentation, forms, or samples for the document types described in section X.V and for allowable costs.
The motion is the committee directs special ed and internal audit staff to consider development of model documentation, forms, or samples for the document types described in section X, V, and for allowable costs. And no further discussion. Cindy, did you have? Nope, that's a check mark. Would members please vote? And that seems to be unanimous. Thank you, and thank you for.
Need to move these to the full board and bring those last couple to the full board then in November.
That's what I thought the point was. And we don't need a further motion to do that, do we? Or do we?
I don't remember.
Yes, you do, and it's right here.
Okay, final motion. Cindy, you want to make that?
I move that the board approves updates to the special education rules as amended, incorporated by reference in R277-750 draft 1 for approval on second and final reading and forward to the board on second and final reading.
The motion is the board approves updates to the special ed rules as amended, incorporated by reference in R277-750 draft 1 for approval on second and final reading and forward to the board on second and final reading. All votes are already in. Thank you. It's unanimous. Thank you all. I am so
Board
sorry.
Member Lear, I
Yes.
apologize. There's one other quick motion that we need to make. And
Okay,
it's really, the rule is just
Yes.
incorporates this by reference.
right.
So all you will be doing is incorporating, if you could just move the rule along as well, and then the rule will just incorporate the version of the SPED rules that
That
the
is
board
present
ultimately
at the
approves.
time. So I'll
then-
make that motion if it's okay. The motion is from the chair that the committee approves R277-750 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Understanding, this is outside the motion, that this incorporates by reference what we've done. Would committee members please vote? And that motion is also unanimous. Thank you, Angie, for calling that to our attention. Thank you. Grab a drink.
Thank
That's
you.
what one. Thanks so much for your patience and your perseverance, especially Laura Lee and Leah. Thanks.